The story begins with the fact that on the roof of one of the high-rise buildings, a man demanded that the girl return his money, but she assured him that at the moment there is not a penny behind her soul. A girl named Yoon Kaeul calculated her fortune in her head, which was 20,000 won, and she needed to stretch it out for 2 weeks before she would receive her salary for the extra part-time job. The water was already cut off in her apartment last week, and collectors came this morning to cut off the electricity supply. So things were quite difficult, although the husband did not even want to hear about it. She understood that if she gave him these funds, she would be without food for the next 2 weeks, risking starvation. Meanwhile, he waved his hand and, threatening her with violence, demanded that she pay him money. The girl tried to dodge the blow and retreated further and further, until her foot felt hollow and she fell off the edge of the roof. At that moment, her whole life flashed before her eyes in an instant. As Yoon Kaeul's head flew downward, she realized that she wasn't going to die so miserable because of a pile of money. The girl lived in extremely difficult conditions, trying her best to survive. Yoon Kaeul grew up in a family where her father served a rather long term of harsh imprisonment. After he returned home, he immediately started drinking without a clue, taking out his anger on everyone. The girl's mother endured such an attitude for several years. But soon her patience broke, so she once ran away from home late at night and did not even take her daughter with her. Yoon Kaeul was not going to live in these unbearable conditions, so one night she hastily packed her personal belongings and ran away from home. Then she thought that her free life was just beginning. But this fatal connection caught up with her in her new life. After all, men of suspicious appearance began to come to her, who demanded that the girl return her father's debts, which had accumulated in a sufficiently large amount. It was because of her father's debts that Yoon Kae lost all her college savings. Still, she did not give up and tried to find additional part-time jobs to make ends meet. But everything that was managed to be earned with such difficulty. As if water flowed through the fingers, and she was left with nothing again in the end. Falling down, the girl realized that during her life, she had neither family nor love, nor friendship. Thinking that she just wanted a quiet life, the young girl began to feel the daylight as if forcing her to open her eyes, and as soon as she did, she saw a man holding her in his arms. The thought immediately flashed through her mind that she had been reborn, and the girl could not believe it, and the voices addressing her were so soft and friendly that no one could think that one day everything would change. The little girl was called Mabel, and Iona realized that this was now her new name. As soon as the girl started crying, the maid ran up to her and asked what happened. The maid decided that the girl was hungry, so she needed to be fed and asked Her Highness if everything was fine, being very concerned about her health. Then Mabel realized that she was reborn as a princess of a country she had never heard of. But in relation to herself, the girl understood that she is the desired child and heiress. At the beginning, the girl could not realize this reality and suspected that all this was just a dream. She kept waiting to wake up and go back to her terrible poor days when she was trying to survive. But then Mabel still recognized this reality and decided that having a golden spoon in her mouth was much better than working hard to somehow survive when she was completely in debt. Maids circled around the little girl day and night, trying to satisfy her every whim. And then she realized that she was born in the great Hermano Empire. She was the second child of the emperor, and her name was Mabel Gardenia Hermano. The young girl learned from the conversations of the maids who looked after her that her own mother died shortly after her birth due to health problems, unable to cope with the difficult childbirth. Usually, men hate such a child who took their wife away from them at the cost of his own life, so she was anxiously waiting for the emperor's reaction after such a loss. The girl decided that if this happens, it will be even easier for her to live like this. Through her dream, she heard a voice calling to her. It was the maid who spoke gently to the girl, explaining that it was past bedtime. It was difficult for her to be in the body of a baby because everything she planned to do or even think, she could not do because she lacked strength and constantly wanted to sleep. Suddenly, the door to the bedroom opened and the emperor entered the room. Surprised, the maid greeted the owner, and he only gestured for her to be quiet and not wake his daughter. The emperor quietly approached the bed and gently touched the cheek of the girl, who was sleeping sweetly, with his hand. Mabel felt a tickle from the touch and opened her eyes. When she focused her gaze on the man looking at her, the first thing she immediately realized was that she was seeing him for the first time. The man said loudly that Mabel was awake. They looked into each other's eyes, and the emperor was surprised to tell the maid that he thought the girl was looking directly into his eyes. So I asked her what she thought about it. The maid replied that she thought that the princess recognized her father, because recently she cried loudly and no one could calm her down, and now she is calmly lying in the crib and looking at the emperor. Mabel wanted to ask the emperor something, but only incomprehensible exclamations came out of her mouth, and the emperor, smiling, noted that it seemed to him that the girl had just said the word papa. Then Mabel was surprised at how young her father was, for at first she thought he was her older brother. Meanwhile, the emperor stroked the girl and smiled at her cooing. The girl was incredibly beautiful, even though she was still very small. The emperor could not fall in love with her huge blue eyes, which did not take his eyes off him and followed his every movement. The voice of the emperor said that he did not even expect anything else from his daughter, who immediately recognized her father and behaves obediently with him. Therefore, he does not even doubt that she will grow up to be a smart princess. Then the emperor became somewhat sad and thoughtfully told the maid that if his late wife Siana were alive now, she would be incredibly happy that they had such an intelligent daughter. The emperor bent over the cradle with the girl and said that he promised her never to allow anyone to offend her. It was said in such a confident, calm voice that the girl wanted to believe it. He reached out his hand again to stroke her cheek in farewell, and she gripped him firmly by the sticks with her hand and did not let go. The emperor smiled back and said that she was very cute. But Mabel thought to herself that she didn't want to do that, because children just reflexively grab everything that comes their way. Then she realized that she did not want any love for herself, because she had already experienced all this in her past life, so she was not going to make the same mistakes twice. She remembered how in her childhood her father played with her and assured her that he did not have a better and more beautiful child, and he would do everything for her, treating her as the most important person in this world. But one day everything changed and the girl was forgotten. Because of their endless quarrels, the parents did not even notice their daughter, who could cry for hours in her room. Therefore, now she did not expect love from her new parents until the end of her days and was ready for it to end one day. Mabel immediately adjusted herself to this and wanted only a quiet life. On this continent, there were only 3 countries that had superpowers. The largest in area was the Hermano Majestic Empire, the second in area was the rival Devlin Empire, and the Abelardo Sacred Empire. Abelardo's Holy Empire tried to settle the conflicting relationship between the other 2 empires. Only believers and representatives who served god Hades lived in Abelardo's empire. It was on the day when Mabel was born that the sacred oracle descended on earth, solemnly announcing that a seed had been sown in the east that would save the whole world. God's representatives on earth witnessed this phenomenon. On that day, thunder and lightning flashed above the imperial palace of Hermano, testifying to the appearance of God's messenger on the sinful earth and indicating his location. Then it became known that the sacred seed spoken of by the prophets was the newborn Mabel. The girl was immediately asked to be sent to the Holy Land in the Empire of Abelardo. Every day, representatives of Abelardo's empire wrote dozens of letters to Esteban, trying to prove to him the importance of sending his daughter to the Holy Land. Emperor Hermano, Esteban Nice Hermano, receiving these letters every day, furiously reviewed their contents and put them away from his eyes. His assistant was anxiously waiting for the owner's reaction. The emperor, banging his fist on the table, said menacingly that the damned Abelardo was trying to take away his only daughter. He understood that, of course, they knew that the empire already had the first Prince Oscar. Abelardo's representatives perfectly understood that Mabel had no chance to take the throne, so they wanted to take her to themselves. But the emperor was not going to give away his daughter, who reminded him so much of his late wife. Therefore, tearing those cursed letters into thousands of pieces, he made a threatening speech that he rejected Abelardo's offer to take his daughter to the sacred land of their empire, stating that he would never give Mabel back. The assistant cowered down in fear after the loud words of the emperor and said in a trembling voice that he did not even know how long they would be able to ignore Abelardo's proposal. A small boy, standing outside the door of the emperor's private office, also witnessed this conversation. The emperor told the aide that they had to find a good reason to refuse to give Mabel away. The emperor and the aide decided that in the event of such a refusal, Abelardo would stop bothering them with his request to hand over Mabel. But then the emperor felt that someone was standing behind the door. With his eyes, he motioned to the assistant to open the door, and as soon as it opened, the little boy, losing his balance, almost fell into the emperor's private office. Realizing that the door opened and he was almost noticed, the boy immediately ran behind the other part of the door and hid, holding his breath. But the father loudly called his son to come in. Oscar realized that he had nowhere to go, because he had already been noticed, so he timidly entered the office and walked towards his father. Oscar greeted His Highness as required by the rules of royal etiquette. The emperor in turn asked why he came to him at such a late hour. The little boy was the first prince of the Germano Empire named Oscar Ale Germano. The boy began to say in a trembling voice that he would like to know when his father would finally allow him to do what he promised. The emperor asked what he meant, and the boy explained that his father had promised to show his younger sister Mabel, so he had come to him today, waiting for his father to fulfill his promise. But the father categorically answered that it is impossible to see her. The boy recalled that the emperor had promised him to show his sister when she was 1 month old, and today was the day. The emperor explained that it was still quite dangerous to go to his sister, because he would want to take her in his arms, and thereby could harm the little girl, as happened with Esteban's precious thing a few weeks ago. But the boy was not going to back down and insisted that the emperor should fulfill his promises, although his father tried to explain that there was a valid reason for his refusal. Oscar began to say in a pitiful voice that he had been looking forward to this event and had been up all night. He even finished his fencing class early today so he wouldn't miss meeting his younger sister. These arguments influenced the emperor's decision, and he patted his son on the head, telling him to follow him. Esteban thought that nothing bad would come of it, since Mabel was still very young. At that time, Mabel was lying in her crib and thinking about the fact that the life of a baby is quite difficult, because lying all day and doing nothing is much more difficult than leading an active lifestyle. Mabel tried to roll over to the other side but couldn't do it on her own. Because of this, she became even more angry, mentally cursing her hopeless situation. The conversations of the maids around her affected her like a lullaby. As soon as they started talking quietly, the little girl fell asleep again in her crib. The maids looked at the little princess and began to discuss what they should feed her before going to bed. But before they could blink an eye, the princess fell asleep again. Suddenly, the door to Mabel's room opened loudly and all the servants turned their heads to see who had dared to disturb Her Highness at such a late hour. On the threshold of the room stood the emperor with his eldest son, Oscar. The boy looked around the room curiously, looking for his younger sister, whom he wanted to see for a month in a row. Mabel heard a familiar voice in her sleep and opened her eyes. She saw that her father was standing in the room, and the first thought that came to her mind was what kind of old man he was leaning here again. The girl reflected on the fact that the emperor exaggerates her more than anyone else, so his frequent visits to her and the manifestation of his love began to annoy her greatly. Esteban immediately went to the crib and praised his daughter for opening her eyes as soon as she heard that her father had come to her. Oscar also leaned over the girl, examining her with interest. Mabel saw a young man who was looking at her and began to think about who it could be, because she saw him for the first time in her room. The emperor could see his son being simply delighted with his little sister, so he told him not to think that Mabel was looking at him, as her eyesight was not yet developed. But the boy did not pay attention to his father's chatter and admired his younger sister. Oscar was sure that Mabel was looking directly into his eyes, which he could not properly enjoy. Mabel grumpily told the men that if they were so smart, why don't they get their asses out of her room? And in fact, she only managed to draw out the long "you" sound. The boy looked at his sister in surprise and said that she managed to say the word "but," while Mabel was angry that because of the lack of teeth she could not say everything that she thought about them. Oscar insisted that her sister had just said the word "but," and he managed to hear it clearly. His words made Mabel even angrier. The emperor smiled and said that the girl probably wanted to say "appa," and if you rearrange the letters in this word, the word "papa" comes out, which he was sure was what his dear daughter was trying to say. The girl began to cry loudly, trying to call her nanny for help, telling her to help her get these annoying men out of the room and leave her alone. Mabel tried to tell the babysitter what she was thinking, but the babysitter decided the girl was crying because she was hungry and asked the babysitter if she had prepared formula. The nanny tenderly took the girl in her arms and prepared to feed her from a bottle. The girl did not hesitate, she rehearsed, asking the emperor and that little boy to leave her room. Then Mabel caught herself thinking that this boy looked very much like her father, and decided that he was her elder brother, of whom her maids had talked so much among themselves. Mabel realized that there was no way she could explain what she wanted, so she decided to finish the cooked dinner as soon as possible, so that everyone would get rid of her and go away. The nanny could not be satisfied with the appetite the girl was eating today, and said aloud that Mabel must be very hungry. Meanwhile, the girl thought that she just wanted to be alone. But the baby's body did not allow her to eat so much, so very soon she felt that she could not eat anymore and spat out the nipple. The nanny looked at the girl in confusion. Meanwhile, the emperor asked the nanny to give him the girl in his arms, and when the girl was already in his arms, Esteban told him to give him a bottle with formula. Then the young man looked gently at his daughter and told her not to worry, because Daddy would feed her properly now. And the shocked girl just blinked her eyes in response. After hearing this, Mabel was not too lazy to snap out of anger. If she could talk, she would scold this man who tried to feed her. Unfortunately, she did not have such an opportunity in the body of a baby. The only thing she could do in this case was to cry loudly. But the emperor did not pay attention to this and cheerfully exclaimed that the father will definitely cope with his daughter and will help her now. The emperor took his daughter as comfortably as possible and began to feed her. She thought only about one thing, that in such a position she would not be able to cope with this huge man, so she began to eat milk. Mabel was angry because she is a baby in the body. She can't even explain that she doesn't like it at all, and his cute smile only annoys her every day. The girl tried to finish the milk as quickly as possible so that she would be unhooked from it, and the father, meanwhile, was just saying with satisfaction that his daughter was the sweetest and most obedient girl. The emperor leaned over to his daughter and wanted to kiss her. But Mabel couldn't hold back the milk she had just been overfed, and threw up everything that was extra right in the emperor's face. The frightened servant and his son immediately ran to the emperor, asking His Highness if everything was all right with him. All of them were worried about his condition and even more, about his reaction to this event. But the emperor just smiled and took out a handkerchief to wipe the milk that was on his face a second ago. Esteban then said that it was not actually milk, but holy water, and the servants looked at each other in surprise, trying to understand the words of their emperor. The emperor also carefully wiped the little girl from excess milk. She thought to herself, what kind of holy water is he pouring now, because it is just ordinary milk with which she was overfed. At that moment, Mabel thought that the emperor was too strange and looked around to see if anyone else thought the same as her. But all the servants looked at their emperor with admiration. Then her gaze rested on her older brother, and she wanted to see in his gaze support and nothing like that she did not expect from him. Instead, the little boy approached his dad and asked him to hold his younger sister in his arms. Mabel tried her best to say that she didn't agree with this stupid idea. The father looked sternly at his son and he frowned, saying guiltily that of course he knew he couldn't hold Mabel in his arms yet. At that time, Mabel thought that the only thing she could do in this situation was to look at one man or another and ask God for only one thing, that he would help her get rid of them. Every day, the door to her room was opened by one of these men, who gleefully shouted her name as he entered. Then Mabel realized that God simply does not exist in this world. God did not hear her prayers. So as soon as the emperor left her room, her cheerful older brother immediately ran to her, who also shouted Mabel's name loudly and told her something. All this only annoyed the little girl. The only thing that calmed her down was a strange object with interesting hanging decorations, which attracted her attention, and she was a little distracted from her daily routine. Meanwhile, the emperor's assistant told a maid named Larimar that an egg of a divine beast had been found in the northern forest, and a beast had hatched from it on Her Highness's birthday. The sacred beast that hatched from the egg looked like a cat but had golden fur. The maid asked where he had heard such nonsense, and the man assured her that she could prove it herself. As soon as Mabel heard about this egg, she immediately wanted a boiled egg instead of the disgusting milk she was fed every day. Still, she could not distract herself from the endless quarrels of Larimar and Xavier. While the maid was focused on talking to the Emperor's aide, Mabel tried to exercise her fingers. Very soon, the girl could hold toys firmly in her hands. Mabel then decided to make her training more difficult and learn to flip. But for this, she first had to raise her head, so this is exactly what she decided to do today. No matter how much she tried to raise her head, nothing came out of her, and this annoyed her even more. The only thing she wanted to know at that moment was when she would eventually grow up. Time in the baby's body dragged on for a very long time. After each unsuccessful attempt, the only thing left for her was to cry bitterly, because she could not even throw away her blanket from anger. It was during her regular training that Oscar entered the room, who said from the threshold that he was glad that she was awake now. The boy was completely dirty and with leaves on his head. But this did not stop him at all, and he cheerfully walked to her bed. Approaching him, he bent over the girl and asked how she was doing. The nanny immediately remarked to the little prince that he should not approach the princess with dirty hands. The boy promised that he would quickly wash up and return to Mabel. The nanny also wanted to add that His Highness would probably not be happy when he found out that Oscar was going to his younger sister's room on his own. But he didn't hear that, because he quickly ran out of the room. While the nanny was distracted, the girl tried to learn to hold her head again. But nothing worked for her, and she fell down on the pillow exhausted. She had beads of sweat on her forehead from intense training. The nanny noticed that the girl was sweating and therefore touched her forehead. The fact that he was covered in cold sweat worried the nanny very much, and the first thing that came to her mind was that the girl was sick. The nanny immediately called the maid Larimar, ordering her to urgently call the doctor to Her Highness. Meanwhile, Mabel tried to say that she was just sweating from training. Oscar, who was taking a bath, heard what was happening in the corridor and was also worried that a doctor was called to his younger sister, because he had no other explanation that something had happened to her. The boy threw down the towel and, not drying himself completely, immediately ran to his sister to see what happened and somehow help Mabel. The girl tried to say that she was not sick, but in return, all she got out was hooting. She was simply powerless to explain something to those around her, because she could not speak. Oscar worriedly noted that the girl's voice is completely weak, so this is another symptom of her serious illness. The nanny worriedly wiped the cold sweat from Her Highness's forehead. Mabel was already tired of explaining that everything was fine with her, so she spat it all out and decided to let everything go its way. The girl decided to rest, closing her eyes. Oscar noticed this and shouted loudly that Mabel had passed out and asked her to wait for the doctor and not die. Meanwhile, the Emperor received news about his daughter's health. The girl was already praying to God for a doctor to come quickly, examine her, and tell everyone that she is healthy. Meanwhile, the door to the room opened loudly, and the worried Emperor flew in. The Emperor ran at top speed to Mabel's crib and touched her forehead. He was very worried about her condition, and as soon as he found out, he immediately ran to his daughter. Mabel woke up at his touch, and their eyes met. She could see in his eyes that he was really worried about her condition. Therefore, she was even uncomfortable that such a fuss was made over a small thing. Displeased, the Emperor shouted to the servants to quickly bring the doctor here and asked why he was still not here. Mabel then believed that he was really worried that something would happen to her. Finally, the doctor came and explained to His Highness that everything was fine with the daughter, and she was covered in a cold sweat only because she was sweating due to excessive heat. Mabel also wanted to jump in and confirm that the doctor was telling the truth, and she was only sweating because she had been diligently practicing lifting her head. But the Emperor demanded to explain why she still sweated, if internal magic is supposed to stabilize body temperature. The doctor replied that he did not know the answer to this question, but now everything is fine. Then the Emperor took his daughter in his arms and brought her closer to him. He looked into her blue eyes and said that thank God she is all right, and her life is not in danger. The servant who was in the room breathed a sigh of relief, because the danger has passed and they can go about their daily business. Oscar was also incredibly happy about this news. As the emperor hugged his daughter, she caught herself thinking that she was not uncomfortable in his arms. This is quite a new and strange feeling for her. At that moment, she did not want him to put her back in the cold bed and tried to enjoy this moment, feeling his warmth and some relief. 10 minutes ago, a meeting was taking place in His Highness's conference room, where the subjects reported that as a result of the recent events, many soldiers had received deep wounds and began to develop fevers. It was certainly a shocking event, although as a result of it, the soldiers managed to capture the main problem of the Hermano Empire, the devil Devlin, who always wore black clothes and had no weapons or armor. He was the main weapon of the opposing Devlin Empire and could single-handedly defeat the entire army of the Hermano Empire. Everyone nicknamed him a cruel and bloodthirsty monster, the Devil Devlin. A bloody battle took place last month when the forces of the Devlin Empire invaded Hermano's territorial lands. But there was also a positive moment. Thanks to this, it was possible to capture the Devil Devlin. Those who had the opportunity to see this devil without a black outfit were simply shocked by the sight. After all, a young child turned out to be a cruel killer who could handle a well-armed army. When the emperor asked how they managed to find him, the subjects explained that the Devil Devlin had crossed the border, and the soldiers managed to catch him, and it seemed as if he was running away from something. Such a message caused concern and surprise at the same time among all those present at the meeting. After all, they could not even imagine what made such a handsome warrior flee from his own lands. The emperor ordered to strengthen the guards who were watching over the devil and to interrogate him without fail. Meanwhile, the emperor's assistant entered the meeting and whispered something in His Highness's ear. After hearing the assistant's report, the emperor became angry, slammed his fist on the table, and rose sharply to his feet. He involuntarily exclaimed that Mabel was ill and, without explaining anything, quickly left the hall. As soon as the door closed behind the emperor, the subjects began to discuss that Mabel must be the princess who was recently born and influence the mood of their emperor. The men noted that the newborn looked a lot like the emperor's late wife and had the same blue eyes and blonde hair as her mother. Everyone unanimously came to the conclusion that she must be very cute. But they were even more frightened by the fact that something might happen to her, because after the death of his wife, the emperor again began to resemble the merciless, bloody emperor, which he was at the beginning of his reign. No one wanted the emperor to turn back into the monster he was before meeting his late wife, so they believed that Mabel could be the only hope for the Hermano Empire. When the maid entered the room, she immediately asked the nanny if everything was all right with their princess, and when she received the answer that everything was fine, she breathed a sigh of relief. Because of this, there was a real commotion. Everyone prayed to the Lord God that the princess would grow up in good health and be protected by the eternal fire of the Hermano Empire, because this directly affected the mood of their emperor. But there was not a single calm day in the life of little Mabel. After that incident, the servants began to dress her so that the girl would not sweat, so they chose clothes and blankets especially carefully. Nanny instructed Larimar to pack a few things, and Xavier brought a crib from the next room, which would be better ventilated for little Mabel. When her older brother Oscar asked how she was feeling today, Mabel said that everyone was particularly busy today, dressing up the little princess and worrying about her well-being. When Mabel was wearing a winter hat that the nanny had tied a few days ago and a winter blanket, and Xavier put her in a new stroller, the girl realized that today would be her first walk. Watching her being carefully wrapped in all those blankets meant to Mabel that the only thing she really wanted right now was for everyone to leave her alone and not put her in that uncomfortable, top-quality stroller. Of course, no one understood that little girl, so they took her to the exit. On the way, Mabel looked at the magnificent palace and noted that until today, she thought it was much smaller than it really was. Larimar and Xavier encouraged the little princess as much as they could, saying that today the weather was just amazing, and in a few days the sun would come out, as if they knew that she would go for a walk. But as soon as Mabel was outside, she immediately noticed that the temperature here was much colder than indoors. The girl began to cry, attracting the attention of all the attendants. Oscar was especially concerned about her condition, who instantly reacted to the fact that the girl was cold and immediately began to take off his outer clothing to warm the little princess. After a few seconds, his warm jacket was on the younger sister, and she could not see anything well because her small eyes could barely see through the dense fabric. Mabel then heard a familiar voice and recognized the Emperor asking the servants if they had gone out for a walk today. She would like to see him, but the jacket prevented her from doing so properly. The Emperor immediately noticed with his watchful eye that the girl was uncomfortable looking under his older brother's jacket, so he took her in his arms and took her out of the carriage. Looking into his daughter's eyes, he asked if she was going to take a good look at everything today and relax in the fresh air. Mabel immediately smiled at her father. Then the Emperor deftly took off his jacket and covered the little girl with it so that it was convenient for her to see everything, and put her back in the carriage. Finally, he said that he would definitely visit her again. The servants were all surprised by such generous gifts of the Emperor because his jacket was made of magical fabric, which well preserved heat and protected it from external damage. The nanny and the maid discussed that they would not have believed that the Emperor was able to give away his jacket if they had not seen it with their own eyes. Then she made a mental note of what kind of old man he had given it to. Watching her father return to his urgent business, Mabel immediately felt the warmth of his jacket and mentally thanked her for finally being able to warm up. The friendly company went to the northern forest of the empire, Huangxiong. They settled on the lawn, snuggled up on warm blankets, and looked at the incredible scenery with pleasure. The girl looked at the blue sky and noted that she had never seen anything like it. In her past life, the sky was like black pitch, through which a couple of stars broke through. Mabel knew that it was in the distant past, and the memory did not allow to forget these memories, so she closed her eyes for a moment. Oscar, who was holding her in his arms, told the maid that her sister probably wanted to sleep. Mabel opened her eyes disgruntled and mentally said that she was just enjoying the scenery. But her older brother, not understanding the children's babbling, said that she could sleep in his arms. The older brother hugged the younger sister, constantly asking if she was cold outside. There was only one question in her head: why he treats her so tenderly. Mabel was reminded of this morning, how her stuffed brother had burst into her room, and the maid had worriedly asked why he had come so early, as he was supposed to be at training now. The boy explained that he had heard about the plans for Mabel's first walk in the fresh air, so he finished his training and ran into the room as fast as he could so as not to miss anything. With a smile on his face, Oscar said that today will be his younger sister's first walk outside, so he wants to be by her side because he is her brother. Then Mabel first thought about how she should treat the family in which she found herself by a strange coincidence, because she even felt uncomfortable because they treated her with sincere love. Meanwhile, Xavier was cleaning dangerous stones scattered on the lawn and noticed something. His gaze was directed somewhere in the distance, and everyone noticed that he did not take his eyes off something. The girls immediately guessed that something unusual was happening and asked the young man what happened. Xavier replied that he had noticed a divine beast, and at his words, even Mabel looked in surprise somewhere in the distance. She would very much like to see with her own eyes what the whole imperial palace was talking about. It was about Shinsu, a mythical beast, similar to a cat but covered with golden fur, which hatched from an egg on the eve of the birth of her highness. There were no mythical beasts where Mabel lived in her past life, so she was very anxious to see with her own eyes what the famous mythical beast really was. Larimar could not calm down in any way and constantly emphasized that maybe Xavier had been tricked and there were no mythical beasts at all, but he insisted that she could see for herself. Mabel also tried to say that she should be taken with them, and it was not part of the adults' plans to risk her highness so much, and they decided that only Oscar would go, accompanied by Larimar and Xavier. And when Oscar was already giving the little princess to the babysitter, she cried loudly, trying to say that she also wanted to go and look at the mythical creature. Mabel resisted as best she could. She rehearsed and waved her hands. The nanny just smiled and jokingly said that probably the little princess also wants to go with Oscar. The girl shouted as hard as she could that she also wanted to be taken with her, and that she would behave well. But all she could do was coo, which no one understood, so she concentrated and shouted the word meow out loud. After that, complete silence reigned on the lawn, and everyone looked at the little princess with their mouths open. because even the day before, the nanny explained that she would be able to say her first word only at the age of 2. Oscar timidly said that the princess had just said the word meow, and the maids confirmed that they too had heard the same word a few minutes before, although it was hard to believe. Mabel repeated the word meow a few more times to make it clear to everyone that she also wanted to go see the magical cat. Larimar and Xavier somehow even looked at the little princess with fear. Mabel looked around the shocked attendants and couldn't understand why they couldn't move away from her first word. And then she came to the conclusion that she must have been too hasty with him. Her Highness began to analyze why she had said such a first word and decided that it must have been because her thinking also began to match the age of the body in which she found herself. She knew that despite the body of a little girl, the thoughts and memory of an adult Yunkeol remained. But her actions were impulsive due to the fact that she is in a body that has not grown. The only thing that was 100% clear was that she was in a hurry with her first word, and there was no going back, and it remained to somehow get out of this situation. Larimar grabbed the little girl and began to shout that their little princess was a real genius, because she spoke her first word at 2 months, and not at 2 years, like all other children of her age. Larimar asked to repeat a few more words of the little princess, but she could no longer make out anything intelligible and only hummed, and the maid humbly waited for another miracle. Oscar was even a little upset that his younger sister's first word was meow, which symbolized the cat, and of course he would like her to somehow dedicate the first word to Oscar. Mabel managed to catch this sad look of her older brother, and for a moment she even felt sorry for him because she understood why he was so upset. So she pulled her little hands to calm him down. The nanny also noticed that the little princess reached out her hands to Oscar and asked His Highness to hug his little sister, because that was exactly what she wanted. After Yoon Keol was reborn as a little princess, she didn't want to be hugged, and even more so, she never asked to be the first. But she wanted to see her brother upset even less. As soon as she was in his arms, she also pulled her arms towards him, and a happy, satisfied smile appeared on Oscar's face, which illuminated the whole meadow with its warmth. But Mabel couldn't wait to see the mythical beast, so she repeated the word meow several more times, emphasizing that she really wanted Oscar to take her to the very place where the mythical cat lives. She decided that she would not say any more new words so that she would not be associated with some genius. And so they all went together along the forest path to meet the mythical beast. All the way, Larimar and Xavier argued about whether the mythical animal actually existed, and Larimar constantly poked the man that he must have been circled around the nose and a teleplum, and hung his ears. The nanny also did not believe that they would be able to see anyone. So in order not to offend Xavier, she said that they must have just played a joke on him and offered to turn back. Only Mabel really wanted to see this miracle and kept her eyes on the surrounding scenery, trying to see something unusual. Finally, she saw a golden glow among the trees. Mabel wanted to let everyone know that she had managed to see someone and started humming and waving her arms. But no one paid any attention to her until she said the word meow loudly again. Only Oscar stopped and informed the adults that the princess must have noticed the mythical cat. And when they turned their heads, they saw a kitten on the lawn, which was covered with golden fur. The adults kept their eyes on the strange animal and noticed that in fact the fur was not made of gold, but it shone so brightly that it seemed that the kitten was completely covered in gold from head to toe. The mythical beast noticed strangers visiting the forest and headed towards Oscar, who was holding the little princess in his arms. She couldn't contain her happiness that she still managed to see this miracle. No one even dared to move so as not to frighten the mythical beast. And when the cat came almost close to Mabel, she could not control her condition and sneezed loudly. The mythical creature immediately got scared and ran into the forest thicket, and Mabel was upset that she did not get a good look at it. The adults decided to return immediately because they thought that the princess had caught a cold. The girl sat thinking that going outside wasn't so bad because there were incredible things to see in the world she had to be reborn in, so it wouldn't hurt to do it again. The boy constantly asked the nanny if his sister had caught a cold, because he was very worried about her condition. The nanny reassured Oscar that everything was fine with the girl, but she shouldn't be out in the cold for so long. Mabel then saw everyone turn their attention to a person standing off to the side, who was also trying to get a look at her. Mabel had never seen this woman in the imperial palace before. All that Mabel managed to learn about that woman was that she had green eyes, a piercing gaze, and an atmosphere of coldness and unreachability around her. She was the steely Duchess of Pacifica Donovan and Oscar's biological mother. But judging by the little boy's reaction, it was clear that he was even afraid of her, because he immediately grabbed the nanny's hand. The Emperor's first marriage was arranged with Pacifica Donovan, but very soon after the birth of Oscar, they broke up. For the second time, the Emperor married Mabel's biological mother, Siana Gardenia. There were rumors that these two were made for each other, but Siana died while giving birth to her long-awaited daughter. Mabel could not believe that Oscar, who behaved so bravely in the presence of the Emperor, did not dare to speak a word in the presence of his own mother. And Mabel also felt somewhat uncomfortable in her presence, because she understood that she was the child of another woman of the Emperor, and for Donovan, she was like an eyesore, so she understood that she was not welcome here. Mabel decided that they should get out of here as soon as possible to avoid running into this woman. But she noted in her mind that she was not going to be afraid of Donovan, so let her not even dream. As soon as the nanny and the children moved to a safe distance, they all breathed a sigh of relief that the piercing gaze of the Duchess no longer reached them. But then they noticed some commotion. The guards and soldiers were somewhat confused and discussed that they had no right to let him escape and needed to regain control of the situation as soon as possible. Nanny and Oscar kept their eyes on the guards and also started to get nervous. Mabel wondered why all these people were so frightened and what could possibly have happened in the imperial palace. The girl noticed that some of the knights could not move and stood as if dug in, looking somewhere in the distance. She searched with her eyes for the reason of their strange behavior to find out what happened. Then her gaze settled on a small boy who was dressed in a black cloak. A kind of black aura formed around him, due to which the guards nearby could not make any movement. Mabel immediately understood that it was because of this small child that such a commotion broke out, and a large number of guards could not cope with it. The other guards shouted for the boy to be grabbed and prevented from escaping. Nanny, with Oscar and Mabel, who witnessed this event, did not even know what to do next, and did not take their eyes off the guards, who could not cope with the boy named Devil Devlin. Mabel looked with interest at what was happening ahead, and for a second met the eyes of those boys in black robes. He had red eyes, which made everything cold inside the girl. From that moment, when their eyes met, Mabel had the impression that there were only the two of them left in the whole world. Some strange feeling covered her whole body. The silence was broken by Oscar, who worriedly told the nanny that it was probably time for them to go back and brought the woman to her senses, who immediately realized that it was necessary to save the little princess immediately. The alarmed woman grabbed the cradle where Mabel was and began to move away from the imperial soldiers as quickly as possible. Oscar also tried to keep up with them. Sitting in the cradle, Mabel kept thinking about what happened around that little boy and who he really was. She could hear the echoes of the orders of the soldiers shouting to catch the devil. She noticed that Oscar, who was walking by, was constantly looking around and was so nervous that his mood was transmitted to the little girl, who also felt that something terrible had happened. Xavier, who was listening to the guard's report, was almost speechless when he heard what happened in the imperial courtyard at the very time when the little princess was there. The guard reported that the Devil Devlin rebelled and dozens of guards escorting him outside could not deal with him. At that time, the little devil was being transferred to the dungeon when he got out of control on the street and staged such a defiance as they had never seen. Xavier, of course, noted that it was expected, but no one could even imagine that at this very moment they would meet Her Highness, who was out for the first walk. Xavier was very worried about this event and asked the guard several times if anything had happened to the little princess. But the man was even more worried about how the Emperor would react to this news, because he was even afraid to imagine what he would do to his subordinates who did not take care of his beloved daughter. Then the guard reported that at the moment when they met in the yard with the little princess, the Devil Devlin lost consciousness, and this helped them to deal with him. They both pondered what could have caused this, and came to the conclusion that the devil must have run out of magical power at that moment, and it helped to catch him while being transferred to another location. Having collected all the information about today's events, Xavier decided to report to the emperor about everything that happened today and went to his office. At first glance, the emperor was calm and studying something from state documents, so Xavier decided that now was the right time to tell about everything. When the emperor looked at his subordinate and asked what had happened, the man smiled wryly and said that he had simply come to report on Her Highness. The emperor was waiting for the report, and Xavier did not know where to start. But when the emperor menacingly ordered to quickly report everything, he reported that Mabel met the devil Devlin on a walk. At that time, the emperor was just holding a cup of tea, and when he found out that the distance when they met was quite large, he said that nothing terrible had happened and continued to enjoy the drink. Xavier breathed a sigh of relief and decided that he had screwed himself up for nothing, so he immediately added that they were in the magical forest today, and Mabel, seeing the golden cat, said the first word, meow. After this news, the emperor's hand, which he was holding the cup, clenched into a fist and became angry with hundreds of little friends around the table. Xavier had no idea what made the emperor so angry. The only thing that occurred to him was that this cup was worth an incredible fortune because it belonged to an imperial relic. The aide felt that the atmosphere in the emperor's office suddenly changed, and the emperor threatened Xavier to repeat everything he had just said, reporting on his daughter. Xavier repeated that on a walk, they met the devil Devlin, and then in the forest Her Highness said her word for the first time, meow, asking the emperor to calm down. Xavier grabbed his head. It started to hurt excruciatingly, and he immediately thought that now his head would explode like the cup they received as a result of tribute from a rival empire hundreds of years ago. The assistant asked to reduce the tension of the emperor's magical energy because being in the room became simply unbearable. Meanwhile, the emperor replied that the cup was just a piece of pottery. Then his tall man quickly got up from the table and told Xavier in a commanding tone that he wanted to see Mabel right away, so they should go to her room right now. Xavier could see that the emperor was worried about something, but at first glance it was clear that his concern had nothing to do with the meeting of the little princess with a dangerous prisoner. Then the assistant smiled and decided that the emperor was probably more interested in his daughter's first word than the pile of urgent matters that had accumulated in the empire recently. After the walk, the maid and nanny together tried to arrange the room so that the girl felt comfortable and could recover as quickly as possible after a walk in the fresh air. Larimar swaddled the girl, worried that she might get sick. Meanwhile, Mabel thought that she was very hot, and if she cried again, they would probably just start feeding her. Therefore, the princess decided to wait a little until the nannies realized that everything was fine with her and untied her. She heard snippets of conversation between the maids discussing her meeting in the courtyard. The little girl was also disturbed by the piercing look of the red eyes of an unfamiliar boy with whom she happened to make eye contact, and she constantly wondered who he was. Suddenly, the door to her room opened, and the emperor entered with his assistant. He immediately went to the crib and took his daughter in his arms. The emperor asked Mabel how her first walk went, and, noticing that his girl was sweating again, asked what happened. The nanny explained that she was better covered so that she wouldn't catch a cold after the walk. The emperor saw a new toy in his daughter's room and asked if it had been tested for dangerous substances and poison. Mabel realized that her father began to cling to the servant, so she decided to save the nanny. Mabel looked at the emperor and said the word meow loudly. The emperor almost lost the gift of speech from surprise and could not regain consciousness for several seconds. Then the emperor told Xavier that after all he was right, and Her Highness had spoken her first word. Mabel, meanwhile, decided not to say anything more to look like a normal child. The emperor carried his daughter around the room and could not be pleased that she had begun to speak. He asked Mabel if she liked cats if she said that first word. The only thing the emperor regretted at that time was that Mabel's first words were about the cat and not about him. The girl noted that she had recently heard such words from Oscar. But then the emperor smiled at his daughter and said that if she really likes cats so much, then he will give her the northern forest of the empire where they live. Before the emperor had time to speak his decision, an assistant brought paper and a pen and began to write down his order. At first, Mabel thought it was just a joke, and then she saw her dad's true intentions. She watched with bated breath as the emperor dictated the first order of the empire that concerned her. It was about transferring the northern forest of the empire to her as her personal property. Mabel could not understand why she would give a forest to her daughter, who was just 2 months old, and did not see any common sense in it at all. Therefore, she looked at the emperor with a frown. The emperor saw how the mood on his daughter's face changed dramatically, and asked Xavier's assistant if he did not think that the little princess did not like such a gift. Mabel expected that at least someone would tell the emperor that this was complete nonsense. But Xavier noted that the northern forest does not compare in any way to the beauty of the imperial residence, which is built along the forest. Then the emperor thought, and told Xavier to write down another order. As the aide began to carefully note down the words of His Highness, he said that he was giving Mabel the entire castle of Ponce. His Highness also added that the northern forest, of course, also belongs to the little daughter. Mabel was finally convinced that her dad was definitely not normal. Time passed imperceptibly, and 3 months had already passed since the birth of Mabel. On this day, the imperial palace was to be visited by guests of honor, priests of the Holy Empire of Abelardo. These priests were representatives of God in all empires, so they had to be honored and respected. The emperor looked down at these men as they began to greet His Highness. The emperor, of course, knew why they had come here, so his mood was far from the best. In his mind, if he could, he would cut them to the bone and burn them all immediately. The men in white robes smiled at the emperor, and the chief among them said that a certain emperor was surprised by their quick visit. But they had a good reason for that. Etiquette required the emperor to also smile amiably. He replied that he had heard that the purpose of their visit was to exchange the scriptures, so he advised them to study everything in more detail. Xavier watched as the representatives of Abelardo's empire thanked the emperor for his concern and assured them that their work on the scriptures would benefit both Abelardo's empire and Hermano. Then the man in the white robe added that the reason for their visit to the imperial palace was also an opportunity to talk about Princess Mabel Winter Gardenia Hermano. The emperor corrected that the princess's name did not contain the word winter, to which the representative Abelardo explained that as soon as the princess was born, the Holy Kingdom announced the second name of Her Highness, Winter. The emperor said that they did not recognize Abelardo's oracle and that no one could be sure that Mabel was the princess from the prophecy. But Abelardo's representatives assured that they have 100% proof. After all, the prophecy said that the seed that will save the world will be born in the east of the continent, where the Hermano Empire is located, and on the day Mabel was born, lightning struck the palace in the middle of a clear sky. The emperor objected, saying that it was just a coincidence, and squeezed the handle of his throne so hard that it almost cracked. Xavier thought with fear that His Highness was again reminiscent of the demon he was before marriage. Clenching his teeth, His Highness said that Mabel was only a defenseless baby who had recently been born, and no one could force him to send his daughter to a foreign empire, only because of a dubious oracle's prophecy. But Abelardo's representative only calmly said aloud that he did not expect a different reaction from the emperor. So they have something for His Highness, after which they hoped he would change his mind. The man in the white robe said that this thing, which was handed over by the Holy King Abelardo personally to His Highness, served so that he would immediately understand everything as soon as he saw what was here. There was a pendant of the previous emperor Hermano. When the previous emperor fought for the throne, he received help from the Holy Empire, and everyone knew about it without exception. As a sign of his loyalty, the late emperor left his pendant, and now this meant that the current emperor would have to give his own daughter for his debts, which he was not going to agree to. The representatives of the Sacred Kingdom pointed out that their king only wanted to protect the one whom the Sacred Oracle had pointed out, and even more so, they were not going to take Mabel away right now. The emperor did not take his eyes off the representatives of the Sacred Empire and noted that he did not look like a person who was going to sell his own daughter. The representatives of the Sacred Empire calmly replied that this time they would back down from such categorical demands, but they had one request for the emperor. He gladly agreed to listen to the offer. The men in white robes said they would like an audience with the little princess. The emperor mentally noted that this was actually their true purpose for coming here. Then the emperor agreed to the audience with the condition that they would not use magical and physical force, would be at a distance of 20 meters, and it would take place in his personal presence. Even in the conditions of the emperor, it was stated that if Mabel starts to cry, the audience will be ended immediately. At that moment, the representative of the Holy Kingdom noted that the emperor had lost all fear. His Highness also added that if they pose any threat, he will be there, and therefore it is better for them to be extremely careful right away. After these words, even the ambassadors got chills. In the room of the little princess, the nanny and Larimar were engaged in their daily affairs, and at the same time had some interesting conversation, discussing the latest events of their lives. Mabel, meanwhile, took advantage of the fact that the maids were busy and decided it was a good time to do some side flip training, which had been occupying her with all her free time. Mabel tried her best to roll over, but her head was so heavy that she couldn't. She decided to wait until she was alone because if she sweats, the violence will happen again. As soon as she calmed down in her crib, the prince ran into the room who joyfully shouted that she had finally waited for her brother and he was free to visit her. Mabel looked in her brother's direction with displeasure and thought that it had been 3 months and he had not stopped trying to get some kind of answer from her and was coming to visit her every day. Oscar said that he would read something to her today, and Mabel thought that it would be some kind of boring book with fairy tales, because the 3-month-old girl had nothing else to count on. The boy sat on a chair next to his sister's bed and opened a book. He began to read with certainty the title of Algord Bautier's book on the influence of the doctrines of Bourdism on the society of the 9th century. Shocked, Mabel blinked her eyes, because she did not expect to hear such a scientific article, because she was in the body of a 3-month-old girl, and her brother was only 6 years old. The boy confidently continued to read that despite the fact that Algord Bautier's ideas were positively perceived by scientists of that time, questions began to appear in a later era. The nanny watched with a smile on her face as the boy diligently read scientific literature for his younger sister. And Mabel at that time was simply mad with anger that she had to listen to all this. She wasn't going to lie quietly in bed, so Mabel began to scream loudly, and Oscar, stopping reading, said that his sister must not be very interested in listening to Algord's doctrines. Then he bent over the little princess and said in a gentle voice that next time he would bring something more interesting, so she should not be upset that they could not read together today. Mabel was simply outraged that at such a young age the prince was being forced to learn this nonsense, and she decided that the whole problem was in the early education of the emperor. Then they all heard some commotion outside the door and immediately realized that the sounds were a little different than when the emperor comes to their room by himself. Suddenly, the door to the little princess's room opened and the emperor entered first, followed by a whole delegation of men dressed in white robes. The little girl did not take her eyes off the strange men. Meanwhile, the servant and the little prince greeted the emperor and the people who had come with him. All the representatives of the sacred empire looked with interest at the little princess, who was lying in bed and kept her eyes on them. Meanwhile, some strange changes began to occur in her body. Mabel could not understand why her body reacted so to the arrival of these men, because inside her everything seemed to be on fire, and she did not know where to put herself to somehow calm down. The senior ambassador of the Sacred Empire said that this person is Her Highness the Princess. Meanwhile, Mabel was worried about whether he could see her real account. Mabel felt that the more the representatives of the Sacred Empire approached her, the more sick she felt. The chief ambassador said that the girl is full of holy power and it can be felt from a distance. The emperor stopped the white-robed man who was moving purposefully towards the child's bed and reminded him of the conditions under which the audience was to take place. Therefore, the man stopped and did not come closer. The ambassador noted that it was in the east that the seed that would save the world was planted, and he could not contain his admiration when he found himself next to the main character of the oracle's prophecy. The emperor reminded once again that they did not believe that this oracle was talking about Mabel in particular, so they should not rush to final conclusions. The representatives of the Abelardo Empire said that Her Highness possessed limitless sacred power that had yet to be awakened. But when this happens, everyone will be convinced that the prophecy has come true. Meanwhile, Mabel heard fragments of a conversation about prophecies, about an oracle, about some sacred power, and the only thing that bothered her at that moment was that she was getting worse and worse. The little princess felt that her bad health was directly related to the presence of the chief ambassador who had recently entered her room, and she wanted him to get out of here as soon as possible. Oscar tried to calm the little sister and told her not to worry, because the priests from the Abelardo Empire came to visit her. She heard about them, but could not understand why they came to her. The emperor eagerly asked the representatives of the Sacred Empire if they had finally satisfied their curiosity by meeting Mabel. The chief ambassador replied that yes. The man in the white robe said that he had heard the latest news and asked the emperor how long he would hold the devil Devlin hostage. The emperor looked at the priests in surprise and answered that about a month. The representatives of the Sacred Empire reported that Devil Devlin is quite a talented person and can use the power of aura without intermediaries. Therefore, they asked whether there were any victims among the locals. The emperor replied that there were quite a few wounded, and this despite the fact that they used a means of controlling magical energy. But keeping a guy under control is quite difficult. The priests of the Abelardo Empire added that Devlin's tendencies had recently worried them enough as they reached out even to the sacred realm. The man in the white robes warned the emperor that given all the previous observations of Devlin, it was clear that they were up to something bad. Therefore, in the end, the chief ambassador of the empire, Abelardo, warned the emperor to be extremely careful when it came time to return the hostage, because it could negatively affect the Hermano Empire. Then the ambassadors bowed and, after saying goodbye to Her Highness Mabel Winter Gardenia Hermano, said that they would definitely see each other very soon and headed for the exit. As soon as the door behind the delegation of priests closed, the girl immediately felt relief, and the nausea seemed to be lifted by hand. In her mind, she noticed that there was nothing hostile in the look of the priests. Therefore, questions arose in her mind. Why did she feel so bad when the representatives of the Sacred Empire were nearby? As soon as they became a family again, the little prince told his father that he did not even expect that the priests of Abelardo would back down from their idea so quickly. The emperor thought for a moment and said that surely the Holy King would definitely come up with something else to get what he intended, so you shouldn't be happy ahead of time. But the emperor was also alarmed that the ambassador suddenly mentioned the Devlin Empire, so he decided to gather more detailed information about everything related to their hostage. Listening to the conversation between father and son, Mabel realized that she had something to do with Abelardo's empire, and the emperor was categorically against this connection. It remained only to find out what exactly interested them in the little girl. Oscar watched as his little sister blinked her eyes in surprise and told her not to worry about anything, because she was still too young to understand anything. Already late at night, when Mabel closed her eyes, the nanny and Xavier thought that the girl was fast asleep and decided not to wake Her Highness, but to go to another room. For a month in a row, the nanny has been going to the neighboring room for the night because the girl does not cry all night. Mabel used her solitude to train without witnesses. Therefore, the girl decided not to waste time and immediately began the most important thing. At first, she tried to use only her hands, and then she involved her legs in such a dream coup. But if Mabel didn't try to roll over, she couldn't do anything. The girl helplessly spread her arms on the pillow and thought that there was nothing strange about it, because she was only 3 months old. The only thing she felt uncomfortable about was that her father and older brother came to her every day and treated her so well without even understanding what she was really thinking. She was convinced that if they found out what she really thought, they would hardly want to have such a daughter and younger sister. Mabel felt uncomfortable because she seemed to be deceiving them all and therefore wanted to grow up as soon as possible and get out of here as far as possible. Her thoughts were interrupted by some unknown sound that came not from the neighboring room where the nanny was, but somewhere very close. So Mabel was wary and even scared. And the cold air that instantly blew on the little girl made her understand that the window to the room was open. Her nanny was so scrupulous that she couldn't leave it open. Then Mabel's senses told her that she was not alone in the room, and this sent a chill down her spine. To prove her guess, she heard extraneous footsteps in the room. With a sinking heart, the girl caught every rustle in the room and realized that footsteps were approaching her bed, so she was afraid to even move. But the fact that someone entered not through the door, but through the window, gave the girl 100% confidence that his intentions were not good at all. And it was definitely someone not from the circle of the little princess. Mabel realized that the footsteps were quite familiar, and the question of why this man had sneaked into her bedroom in the middle of the night remained to be answered. When the man reached Mabel, she heard him come to fetch her and ask if Her Highness was awake. Mabel understood that it was the priest who had come to the audience the day before. The girl felt her helplessness, because she could not only run, but even turn over. The only thing left for her to do in this situation was to cry loudly, which she did. The priest got nervous and asked Her Highness not to cry, because the guards might come running at her cry and then his intentions would be exposed, and he really didn't want that. But after his request, the girl cried even louder, mentally noting that he would be a little nervous, that because of her noise, the servants would soon flock here and he would definitely get a hard time. The priest turned his head from left to right, trying to make sure that no one entered the room, and begged the little princess not to cry, because he wanted only the best for her. The man said loudly that luckily everyone was fast asleep, so they had little time left and needed to act immediately. After making sure no one had entered the room, he held out his arms to Mabel. The girl saw those huge hands and screamed for him to take them away immediately, but instead she only let out a loud cry. She watched it helplessly, trying to do something. With the last of her strength, she strained her entire small body, and the miracle she had been waiting for 3 whole months happened. She managed to turn over on her stomach and thereby avoid the nasty hands of an unknown man. Mabel was simply stunned by such a coup. She stared dumbfounded at the sheet that was now under her and couldn't believe that she had finally managed to do her first flip. Suddenly, the little princess heard a male voice calling her name. It was the emperor, and, judging by his voice, his mood was not at all friendly. He opened the door sharply and ran to his daughter. The girl realized that she was finally saved, because no one would dare to steal her in the presence of the emperor himself, who blocked her with his back and prepared to punish the thief. The enraged emperor asked the priest of the empire, Abelardo, what he had done with her daughter, and the frightened man began to excuse himself by explaining that he had not even touched her with a finger. But the emperor refused to believe the words of the priest, pointing to the little girl, and said that Mabel was now not in the position in which she was left before going to sleep. A man in a white robe tried to prove to the emperor that the girl turned over on her stomach by herself, although it is difficult to believe. The enraged emperor was already reaching for his weapon. And when the emperor's cold blade was near the neck of the representative of the sacred empire, he shouted that he was ready to swear by his god that he was telling the truth. Mabel heard the emperor take out his weapon and realized that the man in the white robe could go to heaven in a few minutes, so she decided to help him and flip back to save the priest. The ambassador tried to justify himself, but the emperor did not want to hear a word he said. Meanwhile, the little girl tried to turn over, but unfortunately, nothing came of it. The priest kept repeating that the girl turned herself over and wanted the emperor to believe him and leave him alive. But the angry emperor shouted that this was the problem, because he missed the first coup of his own daughter because of this scum. Mabel was once again convinced that her dad was a real psycho. After this incident, the entire palace guard was raised to their feet and summoned to the emperor to find out the circumstances of the foreigner's entry into the emperor's palace. Everyone confusedly discussed that they did not even notice at what moment the barrier cracked through which the thief penetrated, and worried that the security would also not be able to avoid punishment due to negligence. Mabel had a special position. She was second in line to the throne and the only heir to the Marquis of Gardenia. And the emperor also had many enemies who would like to get rid of him. But the emperor would never have thought that all these enemies could be bypassed by the representatives of the Abelardo Empire, who during the audience created a hole in the protective barrier and took advantage of it at night. Now the emperor realized that the ambassadors wanted to steal his daughter from the very beginning, so he wanted without a shadow of a doubt to put out their eyes and tear them to pieces. The knights of the empire bent their knees and waited for the emperor's decision, realizing that a rather difficult situation had developed. The attempt to kidnap the princess failed, and the emperor was simply enraged. Everyone in the room understood that if the priests were punished, there would be misunderstandings with the sacred empire, which would be much worse than losing Mabel, but no one dared to tell the emperor. The chief of the knights nevertheless stood up and quietly said that punishing the ambassadors for this incident would be a rather excessive concession, so it is necessary to soberly weigh all the pros and cons before making a decision. The emperor looked displeased at the knight, and he added that if diplomatic relations with the Holy Empire were to be broken, the Ermano Empire would also be in trouble in the political arena. But the emperor seemed to be in his thoughts, and it seemed that he did not hear what his knight was saying to him, because he simply said that his daughter was crying because of the bastard who tried to use her. After thinking about it, the emperor agreed to Gerald's proposal to leave the priest in prison and see the reaction of the Abelardo Empire, although in reality he wanted to finish him off at the scene of the crime. And finally, the emperor voiced his opinion that his daughter would not mind having a personal bodyguard, who would always be by her side and protect her from encroachments on her security. The emperor examined all his knights and asked them if there were any among them who wanted this position. But this tempting offer was like a cup of honey that was filled with hellish training. Knights understood that they would have to take responsibility, even for what you could not physically do, and one wrong decision could lead a brave knight to the status of a corpse. The emperor was waiting for those willing, but no one dared to take on such a responsibility and be the bodyguard of Her Highness the Princess. The emperor was already impatient to wait for the candidates. Finally, there was one brave man who loudly shouted that he wanted to become Mabel's personal bodyguard, and a satisfied smile appeared on the emperor's face. Mabel was calmly lying in her crib, sucking a pacifier and thinking about the fact that this world is so merciless and cruel, so you need to enjoy your position. Just get high in bed. Meanwhile, Larimar and Xavier continued their argument about whether or not Mabel really turns over on her stomach, or if it's just some kind of fiction, and she was happy with this perfect couple. Mabel reflected that she, too, would like to have a friend who could support her at any time like these two. Although Oscar appeared in her, she did not feel such feelings for him. Meanwhile, the door to the bedroom of the little princess opened, and a handsome knight with black hair entered, who decided to come closer and look at Mabel. As soon as Her Highness focused her gaze on the green-eyed brunette, he greeted the little princess and smiled sweetly. Out of surprise, Mabel even spat the nipple out of her mouth and began to fuss. The young man smiled guiltily, and saying that Her Highness must have been frightened, reached to get the pacifier. Picking up the pacifier from the floor, the young man thought about whether it would be appropriate to give it to the child when the pacifier was already lying on the dirty floor, so he held it in his hands in confusion. The girl started to cry because, firstly, she did not understand who was next to her, and secondly, she did not like that someone disturbed her silence. The man had already said out loud that the princess probably didn't like him at first sight. At that moment, the door to the room opened and Nanny Mabel came in. She greeted the young man and said that Sir Lysandro Donovan must have arrived early today. Sir Donovan smiled at the young woman and, kissing her hand, greeted the nurse. He noted that Countess Ruth had somewhat deteriorated since their last meeting. Mabel chaotically remembered where she could already hear this surname and was simply shocked that it was identical with the surname of the Emperor's former wife, Duchess Pacific Donovan. Sir Donovan stated that he was extremely pleased that they would be seeing the Countess every day, and she noted that she was delighted that it would be Master Swordsman Sir Donovan as Her Highness's bodyguard. Mabel pondered over the dialogue she heard and wondered how a relative of the Emperor's ex-wife would protect his daughter from another marriage, even though the man was trying to appear friendly. The little girl did not like that this man was talking so flatteringly to her nanny. Mabel decided that he was a real womanizer, so she really didn't want to see him with her nanny. Sir Donovan said that the little princess must not have liked him. The nanny, objecting, said that Her Highness must be behaving this way because of the events of the previous night, when they tried to kidnap her. The nanny decided to hug the little girl to her and took her out of the crib. As soon as Mabel was in the nanny's arms, she immediately stopped crying. The nanny smiled and noted that the little princess was very kind. Once in the nanny's arms, Mabel glared at Sir Lysandro Donovan and made a mental note that they were both pretending to Countess Ruth to be who they really weren't. Sir Donovan caught this look and exclaimed that the little princess was not human, but just an angel that came down from heaven, and he was 100% sure that the Oracle of the Sacred Empire was right. Hearing these words, Mabel became upset, noting that she would not want such an idiot to be her bodyguard. She felt sick just thinking that now they would see each other every day. Her Highness thought with regret that the Emperor must really hate her if he decided to assign such a stupid and insincere knight to her as a bodyguard. Usually, Oscar behaved like an adult. This is probably because of the expectations that society has placed on the little boy because of his first line of succession to the Emperor's throne. But when the little boy ran into the room to his younger sister, he behaved like an ordinary boy. And today he flew into the room without even knocking. Shouting his sister's name cheerfully, Oscar opened the door and met his eyes with the nanny holding Mabel and his own uncle, who gave him a stern look. The boy frowned at this look and looked frightened at the people present in the room, not even knowing how to behave in such a situation. Sir Donovan sternly asked why Oscar wasn't in class right now, because he was supposed to be studying now, and he didn't even want to think that the prince was skipping class. The cheerful boy suddenly turned into a slaughtered kitten and, with his shoulders slumped, quietly said that he had already managed all the tasks that Sir Donovan had ordered him to do. But instead of some praise, Sir Donovan reprimanded the boy for immediately going to play, because this is not how real heirs behave, so he is disappointed with his behavior. Mabel was shocked how strictly her uncle treats Oscar, because even the Emperor allows the boy to play after classes, because this is what a 6-year-old child should be doing. The nanny also looked pitifully at the little prince, because she was also his nanny. She was also sorry that the child was not allowed to play, but was kept in such harsh conditions. Sir Lysandro Donovan pointed out that Oscar had to start his practicals immediately after theory, and the little boy left Mabel's room with his shoulders slumped. Mabel was very sorry for her older brother, and she decided to help him as much as she could. Therefore, she began to honk, as if calling the boy who had already reached the door. The little princess stretched out her hands towards her older brother, and tears appeared in her eyes. The girl's lips began to tremble, and her highness began to cry. The nanny looked at the little princess in fright and said aloud that she had never cried during the day before, so it was no joke that she began to worry about Mabel's condition. Oscar was also worried that his sister had started to cry, so he turned and ran to her as soon as he heard it. Her highness held out her hands to the prince at the meeting, and he took her in his arms. As soon as Mabel was in his arms, he immediately began to reassure his sister, saying that everything would be fine and that he would be by her side. At that moment, Mabel caught herself thinking that maybe Oscar felt truly happy and needed only when he was with his younger sister. The little princess thought that if her guesses were correct, she should do whatever it took to ensure that this Sir Donovan was around him as little as possible so that Oscar could be happy. Sir Donovan sternly told Oscar that he could let the little princess in, so he had to hand the girl over to the adults because it was quite dangerous to hold her highness. Mabel didn't know what else to do to get Sir Donovan to get away from them, so she meowed loudly, and Donovan was almost speechless from this antics of the little princess. The nanny intervened and said in a calm tone that Donovan seemed to be a bit embarrassed by her highness, so he had to guard her room from the outside so that her highness wouldn't cry. Countess Ruve also added that the little princess likes when Oscar comes to her every day, and if she notices his absence, she will cry and look for her older brother. The uncle had no choice but to pat his nephew on the head and wish him to be extremely careful with the princess. Oscar couldn't be happier that his sister was actually waiting for him every day, while Mabel thought that her nanny had managed to come up with such a brilliant idea in a flash to get rid of Donovan. When Sir Donovan found himself outside the door and walked along the corridor, he met his own sister, who called his brother to find out how things were going with him at the moment. She said that she heard about his appointment as the personal bodyguard of the little princess, and he began to justify that there were no more applicants, so he offered his candidacy. The Duchess advised him not to act so lightly. The brother, frowning, said that if his sister is so strict, then he shouldn't relax either. The Duchess said that it should be so and asked him how the little princess was to him after meeting her in person. Sir Donovan began to tell that the little princess was born so lovely that there would be no man who would not admire her beauty and directness. After these words, the expression on the Duchess's face became simply stony, and Sir Donovan immediately added that she probably did not like this child and asked how he should behave with her. Sir Donovan added that he was treating Oscar as strictly as she had ordered, so she might not worry about it. Lisandro Donovan recalled that once a little boy appeared in the palace, who was abandoned by his mother after the divorce from the emperor. This boy, whose name was Oscar, looked so lonely that Lysander felt very sorry for him, and he often came to play with the little one and cheer him up somehow. Her Highness the Empress also cared for the little boy, but since Sir Donovan was his mother's half-brother, Oscar wanted to spend more time with Lysander. In fact, Lysandra's sister and Oscar's own mother turned out to be so cruel that she ordered this sweet boy to forget about children's toys and completely immerse himself in his studies. Recently, Duchess Donovan entrusted the education of her own son to Lysander himself, including lessons in swordsmanship, but with the only condition that he be as cruel as possible with the boy. Then Lysandra wanted to somehow help the boy and asked his sister if she was not too cruel to him, because Oscar is only 6 years old. The sister didn't even want to listen to her brother's objections, so she said that their conversation was over for today, turned sharply and walked away, saying that it was time to go back to work. Donovan wondered why his sister had called him, because she had never talked to him just like that, and he remembered the expressions on her face when she listened to the story of the little princess. It was clear to the young man that probably the Duchess hated the little princess, and he would not want Mabel's fate to be similar to Oscar's. But he couldn't do anything at the moment because he was worried about his skin. So time passed and summer came. Mabel was bored every day because of the fact that time drags on for so long, and probably it was due to the fact that she remembered all her past lives. In this world, she learned to do almost everything: raise her head, lying on her stomach, crawl and turn over with ease. But she did all this only at night so that no one knew. During the next feeding, the nanny noticed that the little girl had started to move less recently and was worried that she was in pain. And Mabel was simply afraid to make such a mistake as with the word meow. Baby food was introduced into the diet of the princesses, alternating it with milk feeding, and Mabel could not be happier that she finally got something similar to human food. Her Highness could not wait until they started feeding her with normal food, and already imagined what goodies would be worth in the walls of the imperial palace. In her past life, the girl could never afford to eat whatever she wanted due to her difficult financial situation, so she was really looking forward to the moment when she could try something delicious here. Then Mabel forbade herself to think about food because it made her depressed because of her past memories. The girl noticed that Lysandro Donovan was on duty today, and he was peering into the room with interest. She thought that there was no way she would find a common language with this man because of his cruel treatment of Oscar during his studies, when Lysandro forced the 6-year-old to study scientific doctrines. Mabel came to the conclusion that her older brother could only truly relax when he was around her. She knew that Lysandro was trying to please her and was not going to make concessions. The servants noticed with what displeased face the little princess was looking towards the door through which Lysandro was peeking, and said that now they understood what Mabel's facial expressions are when someone is not liked. In the room, Larimar and Xavier argued, as usual, with what expression the princess was looking at them. Mabel, meanwhile, waited for nightfall to resume her daily training. The nanny noticed that the girl was not happy lately, so she said out loud that the weather is quite nice today, and suggested that everyone go for a walk outside. The princess liked this proposal, and she reached out to the nanny. Nanny happily took the little girl and said they could take a walk to the northern woods so she could see her kitty. Everyone around believed that Her Highness liked cats because of the fact that she constantly repeated the word meow, although in reality the girl was not so interested in that mythical cat. The nanny noticed that Her Highness's eyes lit up from such an idea and suggested that everyone get ready for a walk outside and dress the little princess accordingly. A few hours later, Mabel, well-dressed, was sitting in her carriage and ready to fully enjoy a walk in the street, accompanied by her servant and personal bodyguard, who was at a distance. The girl looked at the surrounding scenery with interest and noticed that everything had changed quite a lot since her last walk, and especially the weather, because now it was very hot. The nanny noticed how the girl began to be capricious and decided to make a canopy to shade her from the hot sun. Ruth explained that it was summer, so Mabel should experience all the beauty of this time of year. Mabel was surprised that the nanny cared so much that her pet felt not only a comfortable stay, but also enjoyed all the changes that were happening outside her room. After driving a little further, Mabel felt the intoxicating aroma of flowers and wanted to even touch them. This scent made her remember the past, associated with flowers. The nanny noticed how the girl was looking at the red roses with interest and plucked the flowers so that the little princess could take a closer look at all this beauty. Mabel thought as she held the flower in her hands. In her past life, the girl never received flowers because they were given for special events in life, such as entering or graduating from an educational institution. But even on such solemn events of her life, no one came to her. So she watched from the sidelines as other students were given flowers and photographed with them in memory of their parents and relatives. Looking at this flower given to her by the nanny, Mabel thought that now she had a chance to make things right and therefore she was not going to live such a worthless life as before. Xavier took the little princess in his arms and offered to go to the forest to see if her kitten was there, which they were lucky enough to see last time. The princess's eyes lit up at this suggestion. Out of the corner of her eye, the princess noticed that her bodyguard was hiding behind a tree, who was looking at the princess with a sad look, and she wondered for a moment whether she was being too strict with him. But then Mabel decided that if she didn't behave like this, Oscar wouldn't have any safe place to rest from his boring activities. Holding the little princess firmly in his arms, Xavier went further and further, looking for the golden kitten. He said aloud that they might not be able to meet him today. But before Mabel had time to get upset, they heard some rustling, and suddenly a kitten covered with golden fur appeared on their path. Mabel was so happy that she clapped her hands and said her crowning word, meow, again. Xavier noted that this time the kitten had come out to meet them, and noted that it had grown quite a bit since the day they had last met. Mabel looked at the magical pussy with interest. Xavier sat down next to the kitten, and it immediately came to them and began to rub its golden fur against the hand of the little princess. Mabel liked it very much, and she mentally remarked that the kitten was quite cute. Then the girl wondered if this kitten actually hatched on the day of her birth, and it was somehow connected with the prophecy of the oracle and the visit of representatives of the sacred kingdom to their empire. But at the moment, the princess did not know anything about this for sure, so she decided to deal with it later. Xavier noticed that the girl was sweating and decided to return to the lake. Xavier told the girl to say goodbye to her cat and that they would definitely come back here next time. The man invited Mabel to say the word P.A. when saying goodbye to the magical kitten. And when the little princess repeated this word, Xavier noted that Her Highness was the smartest and sweetest girl he had ever met in his life. Mabel was even embarrassed. Looking at the little kitten who seemed to see the princess off, the princess heard the magical animal say that it would wait for her next time at the same place and said goodbye to the princess. The girl's eyes widened in surprise, and this was noticed by Xavier, who asked what happened. Mabel looked at him in surprise and did not even expect that she was the only one who heard these words. On the way to the lake, the girl decided that after all she heard it all, and she began to hallucinate because of the heat in which she found herself, so she should not pay attention to it. Then Mabel's amusement began as she indicated with her pen which way Xavier should run, and he chased from one end of the lake to the other, and Lisandro did the same, only through the bushes at a distance from them. It gave Mabel incredible pleasure to make Lisandro run in such heat. But Xavier was not enough for a long time, so he lay down on the green grass and offered the princess to rest a little. Out of the corner of her eye, Mabel looked at Larimar and the nanny, who were discussing something tensely, and realized that at the moment these women were not interested in the little princess at all. Mabel thought that they weren't going back to the palace anytime soon, so she should take this chance and do her training in the fresh air when no one was paying attention to her. The nanny noticed that Xavier was lying on the grass and asked if he was watching Her Highness closely enough. The tired boy turned his head to the girl and, making sure that she was nearby, assured the nanny that he was closely watching Her Highness, so you shouldn't worry about it. Mabel noticed that the young man's eyes were beginning to close and decided that she had driven him pretty well. The girl made sure that the girls were busy with their conversations and headed for the forest. Mabel mentally told her servants not to worry about her because she would be back very soon. Moving on the green grass, she noticed that something was sticking out of the bushes. Curiosity took over, and Mabel went into the bushes to see who this piece of dark cloth belonged to. But when she climbed into the bushes, she froze at what she saw. Devil Devlin was lying in the bushes on the green grass, covered in dirt and blood. It was clearly visible to the naked eye that he was lying unconscious. Mabel crawled as close as possible to the boy and began to examine the Devil Devlin with interest. She knew who it was because they had already met in the courtyard of the Imperial Palace. After their last meeting, she knew for sure that Devil Devlin had been captured by the guards and put behind bars again in the dungeon of the Imperial Palace. The entire blood-covered devil lay helplessly unconscious in the forest, and Mabel began to wonder how he got here, because it was extremely difficult to escape from the Imperial Guard. Looking at the little boy's body, which was covered with severe injuries, the little princess thought that to abuse a child like this is too much, even if he is a criminal. In appearance, Devlin's devil was a boy about the same age as Oscar, so the little princess felt sorry that he had met such a difficult fate. The princess wanted to wipe the blood from the mutilated devil's body, but all she could do was crawl, and she was angry because she was unable to even talk or do anything in this situation. Meanwhile, Nanny Ruth noticed that the princess had disappeared from sight and woke Xavier so that the young man would find Her Highness and begin to worry that everything was okay with the princess. Mabel heard that in a few minutes the search for her would begin, and she did not know what to do so that the servants would not notice the crippled boy, because he had already had such a good time. The little girl made a quick decision to hide the boy. The only thing she could do was to pluck leaves and sprinkle them on Devil Devlin's body. Xavier went to look for the little princess and cheerfully shouted Her Highness's name. Meanwhile, she tried faster and faster to tear the green leaves that happened to be under her hands. Leaves were flying at the boy, and Mabel, meanwhile, was very worried that she did not have time to bury his body because she could already hear the footsteps of Xavier, who was coming to take her away. From the touch of the leaves falling on the young boy, he opened his eyes, and for a moment their eyes met again. A chill ran down the back of the little girl, and she even froze. Mabel felt that those red eyes that were looking so intently at her began to hypnotize her. The princess realized that the best way to save the boy would be to crawl away as far as possible so that Xavier would not notice him. The princess turned around and started crawling in the opposite direction as fast as she could to get away from Devil Devlin. Finally, Xavier managed to find Her Highness, and he, looking at the dirty little hands, said that she must have had a good time, while he narrowed his eyes for a moment. When Xavier carried the little princess in his arms to the girls, she thought that she had done everything she could, and although the devil's body had many wounds, she still believed that he would survive. The boy was lying exhausted on the grass and could not understand whether he had actually seen a little girl with blue eyes recently, or whether it was all just a dream. Meanwhile, Devil Devlin had a dream so long that he no longer remembers when it began. In his sleep, he was constantly falling down, enveloped in a continuous piercing darkness. The boy lost control of his body and began to kill everyone who came in his way, like a weapon that was created specifically only for killing. While in this endless sleep, Devil Devlin sometimes managed to wake up, and was mostly in the iron chains that encased his limbs. But no amount of iron could restrain the incredible power of the Devil Devlin, and even the magic spheres that served as a barrier against the use of his power could not restrain the little boy. A few minutes after the devil woke up, he was on the loose. Even an incredible number of guards could not restrain the little boy. Having dealt with the guards with ease, the boy calmly left the dungeon, and a few minutes later an alarm was sounded about the escape of the Devil Devlin. That time he managed to hide in the courtyard of the Hermano Palace when the guards were frantically searching for the little guy. And he was waiting for a good opportunity to run away from here. When the guards managed to find the boy and surrounded him to take him back into custody, the boy's mind cleared for a moment. It happened exactly at the moment when he met the eyes of the little girl. Devil Devlin remembered for the rest of his life the look of the blue eyes that looked at him on that fateful day for him. Then he became confused and his vigilance was interrupted again. It was probably because of this that Devil Devlin lost consciousness, and then he realized that he had lost a lot of blood at that time, which had a critical effect on his physical condition. Devlin never understood what had caused his eternally clouded mind to instantly clear, and whether it was actually connected to the blue eyes that had sunk into his soul. When, after another escape, the devil fell on a green lawn to rest a little and restore his physical condition thanks to magical power. Therefore, Devlin thought that this would be the best solution. The exhausted boy felt that some living creature was approaching him, and judging by its size, he thought that it was a small rabbit, so killing it was not necessary. In fact, it was a little princess who crawled up to him and looked at the devil with interest. Being almost unconscious, the devil decided that the rabbit should go away himself, smelling the blood. When the green leaves landed on Devlin's face, he realized that there was no rabbit at all. And as soon as he strained his vision, he saw the same little girl with blue eyes nearby. As soon as their eyes met, the devil's consciousness, like last time, became clearer, and at the same time, the pressure of all kinds of prohibitions was loosened in his middle. Devlin's devil heard a man ask the girl why she was so dirty, and then the voices slowly began to fade away. The boy began to feel safe again and fell asleep. Late at night, the nanny touched her height and noticed that the girl was too hot. Ruth immediately shouted for Larimar to call the doctor at once to examine her highness. Mabel must have fallen ill because they had been caught in a sudden downpour during their walk, which had begun in the middle of a clear, fine day. And although when everyone returned from the walk, the princess was changed, it seemed that her highness had caught a seasonal fever, which she had never had before. A few minutes later, a doctor came and examined the girl and diagnosed her with a cold. The servants stood with their heads down and waited for the emperor's verdict. The emperor kept his eyes on his daughter and thought that she was still so young that it was difficult for her to endure even a common cold. All his thoughts were with Mabel. The doctor said that he gave the little princess antipyretic drugs, so the temperature should go down in a few minutes. Oscar was also worried about his little sister and did not leave the bed. The emperor, suspicious, asked the doctor if he was sure that the temperature would drop. A man with a medical education assured the emperor that these medicines would definitely work on the princess. Oscar saw his father seething with anger and decided to stand up for the doctor, telling the emperor that the antipyretic drugs must work and there should be no doubt about it. A second later, the door to Mabel's bedroom opened and the emperor's aide appeared in it, shouting that he had an urgent report for the emperor personally. The emperor almost burned him with his looks and only angrily squeezed him out of himself to make him close the bed, because the princess fell ill and she just managed to fall asleep. But the assistant, apologizing, said that the matter was so urgent that he did not even think about the place where he would report on it. The emperor looked sternly at the aide and told him to tell what had caused the emperor to bother so urgently. The aide said that Devlin's devil escaped from the dungeon. The assistant said that Devlin's devil neutralized the magic sphere without much difficulty and then easily dealt with the guards and disappeared without a trace in an unknown direction. The assistant also reported that the traces of blood left by the wounded devil led to the northern forest and then disappeared. The emperor at that moment thought that his daughter was right there today. The emperor thanked fate that the devil and Mabel did not meet today and ordered the security of Mabel's palace to be increased tenfold and entry and exit from the residence to be carried out only with passes. The assistant assured the emperor that all security measures had already been taken, and the security had been strengthened even 20 times, so there was no need to worry about the safety of the little princess. After thinking about it, the emperor said that everything is fine with security measures and ordered to comb the entire northern forest from beginning to end. The assistant replied that everything would be done according to the emperor's order. Then the emperor ordered everyone to leave the room, because he decided that for the recovery of the little girl, all this commotion would be unnecessary. Oscar looked offended at his father, because he also wanted to stay with his sister. The emperor was very worried about his daughter, because he loved her more than anything in the world. Therefore, he decided to personally look after the princess when she was suffering from a high temperature. The only thing he wanted at that moment was that his Mabel did not get sick, although he understood that he would have to face this more than once in his life. He was not sure that he would endure such a shock again. The emperor had the largest empire on the continent, and there was so much gold and silver that it was scary to imagine. But at the moment when he needed to protect the closest person, he failed. The emperor was momentarily transported back in time when, during childbirth, his lovely Siana begged him to give up her life in favor of the life of his young daughter, arguing that he had never refused her requests. It was a difficult choice, and the emperor did not dare to make it until his wife asked for forgiveness. Those were the last words he heard from her. These were definitely not the words Evan wanted to hear at the last moment of his wife's life. He didn't want Siana to apologize to him for anything. The emperor held Siana's hand, which was already cold, and thought that he would like her last words to be not sorry but love, but turning back time was already impossible. The death of his wife left a deep wound on the emperor's heart, which only became a scar thanks to the birth of a lovely daughter. Then the emperor swore to protect her at all costs. The emperor was most afraid of the fact that Mabel would one day leave him like Siana. Just thinking about it made the blood in his veins stop. Evan would not be able to survive this a second time. But then his gaze stopped at the little girl lying in bed, and he cursed himself for his thoughts. For now, Evan told himself to pull himself together and not doubt that he would definitely protect Mabel. The emperor spoke aloud that he was the father of this little baby and would do everything in his power to protect the princess from all troubles. Mabel, meanwhile, was delirious and transported to the past when she also fell ill and lay alone in her rooms, thinking that if her fever continued, she might soon die. The little girl understood that she did not have to rely on anyone and decided to take medicine. But for this, she has to somehow get up and get to the first aid kit. When the girl managed to open the drawer, she realized to her chagrin that the medicine had expired long ago, and she still didn't have the money to buy new ones. Therefore, the girl drank the pills that she found and thought that today exactly a month has passed since her father died, and her mother will never return home. Lying on the cold floor, the little girl wondered why her parents didn't love her, because other children's parents worry about them when they get sick. And now she was lying alone, exhausted. The girl asked herself why she was always alone and would like to get an answer to this question. But no one was around to ask. Her dream at that moment was to get rid of loneliness. The girl felt someone put a cold towel on her forehead, and it immediately made her feel better. She heard a man's voice telling her not to get sick and vowing to protect her so it wouldn't happen. In her mind, the girl realized that it could not be her father, because he was already dead, but she was so warm from his care that she did not want to wake up, even if it was a dream. The girl understood that if she believed these words and then was disappointed, she would be in unbearable pain. But at the moment, she was least worried about that, because she wanted to feel needed. The girl decided that even if she is fast asleep now, let this dream not end for as long as possible, because she has never felt so happy in her life. In the morning, the sun's rays woke up the little girl, and she, opening her eyes, began to look at the interior, which was completely different from her own room from the past life. Mabel touched the wet towel on her forehead with her hand and remembered that she had fallen ill and was currently in the imperial palace. So she breathed a sigh of relief that her past life was a thing of the past. The girl still remembered that her father came to her in a dream, who calmed and supported her, and also changed cold towels so that the temperature would go down faster. But Mabel decided that it was just a dream. Turning on her side, Her Highness saw that there was indeed a tired emperor sitting next to the child's bed, who closed his eyes and rested after a hard night when he was on duty over his sick daughter. Before Mabel could analyze why he was here at such an early hour, the emperor woke up and opened his eyes. He joyfully asked his daughter if she slept well. Even immediately touched his daughter's forehead to make sure the temperature was down and wiped her face with a wet towel. Mabel could not understand where her nanny had gone and why the emperor was around. The emperor immediately made sure that his daughter took the medicine on time, and she noticed that the color of his face indicated that the emperor had not slept all night. And then Mabel realized that it was not a dream. The little princess looked at the emperor and realized that the one who took care of her all night was the emperor, and she did not dream of it. The emperor smiled gently at his daughter. From the realization that the emperor did not leave the sick Mabel all night, she became emotional and tears appeared in her eyes. Evan immediately noticed this and took the girl in his arms to calm her down. Mabel just melted in his arms. It seemed to her that the emperor's hands were so warm and she was so comfortable that the girl wondered if she was worthy of being loved just like that. The girl could not understand what had changed and associated it with her rebirth. After all, she had never felt anything like this before, and her soul was somewhat confused, so Mabel could not believe it. When Mabel's room was ventilated, she enjoyed the cool breeze that carried the scent of flowers from the street. The nanny said it was time to close the windows. The little princess was upset that because of her cold walks outside were now prohibited, and airing the room also took less time than usual. Mabel did not like this hyper-concern with which the emperor surrounded her, because he recently forbade playing with all iron and wooden toys, even those that Mabel liked very much. The little girl's thoughts were interrupted by the cheerful voice of her older brother, who came running after class to say hello to his sister. He said that it is just incredibly hot outside today. The nanny offered the boy cool tea and Oscar gladly agreed. Then the boy approached Mabel, took her in his arms, and offered to play something interesting today. Out of the corner of her eye, the princess noticed Lysandro Donovan peering into the room through the crack in the door. During this time, their relationship did not improve, so the girl loudly said the word meow. Lysandro immediately closed the door and disappeared behind it. Oscar laughed merrily at the fact that his sister really disliked his own uncle, and Mabel meanwhile thought that she was doing all this for him. Then the boy hugged his sister and told her not to hate Lysander Donovan so much, because until recently he was very nice to Oscar and often played with him. The boy said that his uncle's relationship changed as soon as he was appointed as a teacher. And despite this, Donovan is still a good person, because he wants Oscar to be a decent man. But the girl had her own opinion about Lysander Donovan. Oscar asked Xavier to bring the books that the boy had left behind the door, and the man happily complied with the prince's request. As soon as Mabel saw the pile of books the man had brought in, she was surprised at the number of them. The boy explained that this was his homework and offered to do it together. Mabel noticed that this time the books were not as difficult as the ones Oscar had read to her before. The princess pulled the little hands to examine them. Oscar watched his younger sister with interest. But when Her Highness opened the book, she realized that she did not understand anything in the hieroglyphs that were written there. She mentally noted that it was quite unfair to give her the ability to speak but not to read. Meanwhile, Oscar said that he would now read his homework to her, and she was curiously looking at the huge number of pictures that were in the books where different continents were depicted. Oscar noticed that Mabel was interested in looking at the maps of the continents, and he noted that she did not like his literature at all last time. Mabel mentally replied that only a psycho could like those doctrines. Oscar showed where the Hermano Empire is. It was huge in size, and it happened thanks to the captured territories as a result of the wars that took place during the last 500 years. The boy also showed where the sacred kingdom of Abelardo, the kingdom of Bargata and Heirin, is located. And the girl was even ashamed that in her 20s she is less familiar with the world map than a 6-year-old boy. Then the little princess pointed her finger at the second largest country, and the boy even hesitated to ask Mabel about it. Oscar then said it was the Devlin Empire. The first thing that came to Mabel's mind when she heard this name was the Devil Devlin. She immediately wondered if he had managed to escape or if he had been recaptured since their last meeting. Oscar reported that the relationship between Hermano and Devlin is not very friendly. The Devlin Empire is just waiting to attack Hermano. Mabel now understood Oscar's reaction when she asked him about this country. The boy said that the Abelardo Empire serves as a buffer zone between the rival empires, yet they border on the north side, where a bloody skirmish recently took place between them. Oscar also reported that as a result of this battle, all the forces of the Hermano Empire were destroyed, and only one soldier from the Devlin Empire did it. Then Oscar asked in his voice why he tells such adult things to his younger sister, because she still can't understand anything. Mabel thought he was also a child too early to know these details. Then Oscar invited his younger sister to repeat after him and stretched out his hands in front of him. Mabel happily repeated her older brother's movements. All the servants watched these fun games with pleasure. On the day when the hot summer wind gave way to a cool breeze, Mabel turned 8 months old. The doctor examined her and said that there are no abnormalities in her development. The nanny noticed that the girl was barely moving. Mabel, meanwhile, was lying in her bed and pondering something of her own. She heard this conversation and wanted to note that she does not do anything so as not to frighten those around her. The doctor reassured the nanny, saying that after all, Mabel knows how to roll over and, although late, she still started to crawl. Therefore, there are no violations in the physical development of the princess. Mabel saw the nanny genuinely worried about her and wanted to show her that she had already learned enough, but she couldn't make another mistake, like with her language, because of which she had to meow for a long time. The nanny patted the girl and expressed hope that everything would be fine. Mabel wanted to tell her that there was no doubt about it, she just didn't know what kids her age could do. Mabel only behaved like this during the day. When night came, she went through her training with all her might, and now her goal was to take the first step. But this was the most secret work of the little princess. The girl was worried that Lisandro, who had been awake all night outside her door, wouldn't hear anything, so she decided to start by standing up, holding on to the rail of her crib. Meanwhile, in the corridors of the imperial palace, Evan, with a night lamp in his hands, walked to his little daughter to look at how sweetly she was sleeping in her bed before going to bed. Mabel decided not to give up and tried her best to get back on her feet. She encouraged herself, saying that she had to deal with similar trials in her past life. After several unsuccessful attempts, the girl still managed to stand firmly on her feet and even surprised herself with her capabilities. Now it was possible to think about the first step. She perfectly understood that she would not be able to run right away, but it was very painful for her to take the first step in this life, and the little princess confidently stepped forward as she did so. The emperor had already approached the door to Mabel's bedroom. Lisandro wanted to greet His Highness, but Evan motioned for him to say nothing so as not to wake his daughter. When Lisandro moved away from the door, the emperor very quietly opened them and looked into the crack. But from what he saw, he froze at the threshold and did not dare to go inside. His little daughter was stomping in bed and he couldn't believe it, because back in the day they had discussed with the doctor that Mabel wasn't moving enough for her age. The night lamp fell from the emperor's trembling hands. The sound of the falling lamp startled Mabel, and she realized that this time she was caught. The girl did not know how to explain this to her father, and then she realized that she could not speak. The emperor loudly shouted that Mabel is a genius. From these unexpected events, Mabel fell on her ass and blinked her eyes in shock, watching her father rejoice over the fact that his daughter was a real genius who managed to leave at such a young age. The emperor immediately rushed to his daughter and began to joyfully tell her that he did not even expect that his daughter would leave so early, and was proud that he managed to share this solemn event with her. Mabel was anxiously waiting to see what the emperor would do next, and he quickly ran to her bed and grabbed his daughter in his arms. The emperor circled and tossed the baby up, saying that it was simply incredible. Holding his daughter in his arms, the emperor said that he should give some worthy gift in such honor, and began to think about how to present such an unforgettable gift to Mabel. Mabel dreamed of only one thing, that her crazy dad would calm down and put her to bed because she was already starting to worry about her safety. She also did not want to receive any gifts. And after thinking a little, the emperor said that he would give her the Principality of Bistante. After all, this is a very rich land, which is well suited for a resort. Mabel just blinked in surprise. The next day at a meeting, one of the dukes reported that the Devil Devlin had been spotted on the border of their empire. The emperor concluded that it looked like he had returned to the Devlin Empire. The emperor was informed that the situation was becoming tense, and the Devlin Empire was gathering strength, so they proposed to send a squad of knights led by a swordsman to the border. The dukes at the meeting were worried that today's meeting was going to be quite tense because all the news was extremely bad. But then they noticed that the emperor was sitting quite satisfied. Everyone began to whisper that their lord's mood was very different from the previous gatherings, and agreed that it was all thanks to his 8-month-old daughter, who was influencing him so well. The men asked the emperor what was the reason for his good mood, and Evan told that last night, when he sneaked into Mabel's room, he witnessed that the girl had started walking. The men present noted that this is quite a very rare case because she is still quite young, and the emperor noted that his daughter is a real genius, and very soon she will call him Daddy. And then the emperor announced that he would give her the Principality of Bistante as a sign of this event. but the dukes began to whisper about the fact that these lands should rightfully belong to the heir to the throne and were extremely important. At first, the men thought it was just a joke and began to laugh merrily, because it never occurred to anyone that these lands could be given to an 8-month-old girl. But the emperor shouted that it was not a joke. The dukes looked at each other and decided not to argue with the emperors, because this is his land, so he has the right to dispose of it as he wishes. And then they noted that Her Highness would soon be a year old, and a satisfied smile appeared on the emperor's face. Evan said they should celebrate him properly. Those present at the meeting could not even imagine what gift the emperor would make to his dowager on the anniversary, because he had already given her the principality and the entire northern forest along with land. After the meeting, the emperor was very eager to go to his daughter's room to visit her, but his assistant was already waiting for him with a pile of papers that needed to be reviewed urgently. The emperor did not have time to leave the meeting hall when the Marquis of Gardenia approached him and asked for a favor to see Her Highness the Princess and on the sidelines of his own grandson. The emperor looked at the Marquis in a daze and mentally noted that he had begun again to get him to look at his grandson. For the first 3 months, the emperor barely flinched from his requests. Marquis Gardenia recalled that the girl had already turned 8 months old, so in his opinion, it was high time to see her granddaughter. After all, he had not seen her since birth. The emperor objected, saying that the girl was still too young. But the Marquis answered him that he himself had just said at the meeting that Mabel had begun to walk. And besides, she was the heiress of the Marquises of Gardenia. The emperor really didn't want to introduce her to the Marquis of Gardenia, because he was worried that this old fox might want to take his own granddaughter to himself, and Evan would not like to deal with these problems as well. But he had no good reason to refuse to see his grandfather. Therefore, the emperor grumbled for the Marquis to invite an official audience. Marquis happily replied that he would do so in the near future. Evan remembered the look on Marquis's face when he asked for his daughter's hand and heart. Therefore, today's amiable Marquis aroused some suspicion in the emperor, and Evan did not like it at all. In the imperial palace, secrets were kept for a short time, and soon everyone already knew that Mabel had started walking. Servants excitedly circled the little girl, holding her hand. Mabel thought to herself that it must be the emperor who talked about her walking skills to the right and left. And then she thought that it was even for the best, because now she could train at least all day. Ruth ordered Larimar and Xavier to take care of Her Highness, because she had urgent business and had to be away. The young people replied that they would be happy to play with the little princess. The princess, who had just fallen after a bad step, was lying on the floor and resting. Larimar motioned for her to get up, as she would now secure her as she walked. The girl, of course, wanted to rest, but she couldn't refuse Larimar and Xavier to take care of her, so she lovingly walked with them one by one, holding hands until they fell tired on the floor. Suddenly, the door to the room opened, and Mabel heard the voice of the nanny sternly telling the young people to get off the floor immediately and put themselves in order. When Mabel turned her head to the nanny, she saw that Ruth had not come alone. Behind the young woman is an elderly man who has been carefully examining the little princess. The girl saw this man for the first time, but she felt that her heart sank under his watchful gaze, just like when she met the ambassador of the Holy Empire, so she decided to be extremely careful. Xavier picked up the little princess from the floor and reassured her so she wouldn't be scared. Then he and Larimar bowed and greeted the Marquis of Gardenia. Mabel heard the name Gardenia and immediately knew it was her name too. Therefore, they must be relatives. The little princess directed her gaze at the man and began to examine him. The man smiled at the girl and greeted Her Highness. He introduced himself and said that he was seeing his own granddaughter for the first time since she was born, because before that there was no opportunity. The girl involuntarily said grandfather, and the Marquis was almost speechless from surprise. This man's reaction reminded the girl of someone she knew, and she regretted that she could not control her speech. The emperor in his office kept his eyes on the door, and his assistant mentally noted that it was rather strange that Evan had not yet run out of the office to his daughter. His Highness could not concentrate on work, and the assistant understood that the emperor was now worried about his daughter's meeting with his maternal grandfather, which is why the emperor was wandering somewhere in his thoughts. For the emperor, the Marquis was the number 2 thief who wanted to take his daughter away from him. And the first thief on his list was the representatives of the Abelardo Sacred Empire, who considered Mabel a holy seed. Gustav could see how His Highness was worried and noted that for him, the fact that he stayed to work in the office today, instead of running after the Marquis to his daughter, was a real deed. The aide asked why the emperor did not also go to Mabel's room. Evan replied that he just didn't want to look like a fool. Gustav mentally noted that it was Evan who looked like a fool lately. Therefore, Gustav told the emperor that probably his daughter was also worried at the first meeting with the unknown Marquis, and she would not mind the support of the emperor. Evan was very happy with this idea. The assistant also added that Her Highness probably loves the emperor very much, so she also wants to be close to him. Although, in fact, the assistant had no idea what was going on in the head of the little princess. The emperor joyfully exclaimed that Gustav was his best assistant, and that his thoughts always contained a grain of truth. Evan added that apart from his talented assistant, he had no one to rely on. Gustav was embarrassed by such compliments and thought that after the meeting with the princess, the emperor should calm down and then he would definitely focus on urgent matters, which he had accumulated quite a lot. Gustav suggested that the emperor immediately go to his daughter, and His Highness asked what would happen with urgent matters. The assistant assured that he would take everything into his own hands. The joyful emperor, as if on wings, flew out of his study and, closing the door, said for the last time that Gustav is the best, and then quickly walked to his daughter's room. Marquis Gardenia, holding his granddaughter in his arms, told with tears in his eyes that he did not want Siana to marry the emperor, and no one asked his opinion. Grandfather cried for a long time, saying that life is full of troubles and until Mabel grows up, she should be with her father. The princess could not wait until grandfather stopped drinking. But when the Marquis stopped crying, he told that the emperor was the princess's biological father, an extremely cruel monarch who had no human feelings. The Marquis told the story of how the most beautiful woman of the empire, Hermano, and the most cruel tyrant got married, although the Marquis himself was categorically against this marriage. Evan was an emperor who didn't care about the lives of others. An emperor who the previous emperor hated so much that he exiled him to war, an emperor who had the worst reputation of all monarchs. And it was this emperor who divorced and proposed to the daughter of Marquis Gardenius. Evan sought her consent so persistently that Siana could not resist. And besides, the emperor separated his granddaughter from her grandfather. Marquis said that he had been trying to meet his granddaughter for 8 months, and only after an official audience and a week of waiting, he finally saw Mabel. The girl felt sorry for her grandfather and said, "Grandfather again." The Marquis thanked the princess for encouraging him and noted that she was as kind as her own mother. Meanwhile, Mabel pondered how to react to the fact that her own father was hated by the entire empire. Ruth witnessed Marquis Gardenia's frank conversation with the little girl, and mentally noted that it was too grown-up talk for an 8-month-old baby. Suddenly, the door to Mabel's room opened, and the emperor entered the room. The nanny immediately bowed and greeted His Highness, while he purposefully headed towards his daughter. The emperor looked at the girl and asked if she was afraid to be here alone with an unknown man. Then Evan held out his hands for the girl to come to him. But Mabel felt how the grandfather tightened his arms, and she understood that he was not going to voluntarily give the girl to the emperor. Meanwhile, the Marquis bowed down and greeted His Highness. Mabel was as if between two flames and did not know how to get out of this situation. The conflict between father-in-law and son-in-law was so frank that sparks flew in their eyes. Being between them now was the last thing Mabel wanted at this moment. Therefore, she tried to get out of her grandfather's arms, but he held her so tightly that the girl remained in place. The nanny saw how the little princess felt now and wanted to somehow help her, but she did not know how to take Her Highness away from such influential men. Mabel looked at Ruth pleadingly and waited for help. Suddenly, Mabel nevertheless wriggled out of her grandfather's arms and deftly climbed to the edge of the bed. She grabbed the railing and rose to her feet. The nanny screamed in surprise, not taking her eyes off the princess. The adults around the little girl seemed to freeze and looked at the princess. Mabel at first did not understand what such a reaction of adults was connected with, and then came to the conclusion that everyone was surprised by her dexterity. The emperor immediately noted that the girl was athletic, like all his kind, and the marquis said that she was as agile as he. Then they began to argue whether she would be good in politics or in sports, arguing this by the fact that one of them had Mabel as their own granddaughter and the other as their own daughter. They could not agree on whose lineage she was so brilliant. Mabel, meanwhile, wanted it all to be over as soon as possible. While the men were foaming at the mouth arguing over whose line the princess looked more like, Mabel decided to take advantage of the situation and go to the nanny. But when she turned around, she saw the hands of both men who were calling her to them. She understood that no matter who she went to this time, it would still lead to even more arguments between the men. So she decided to just cry so as not to complicate the conflict even more. Fortunately, a joyful Oscar ran into the room and told the audience that the door to the room was open, so he came to visit his sister after classes. But seeing the situation around Mabel, he stopped halfway. The girl decided that there was a better way than to cry and stretched out her arms towards her older brother, telling him to come. But what came out of her was more like a child's cooing. Oscar still understood what his little sister wanted and approached her, holding out his hands. He said that he was late today because there was a lot of homework. Mabel hugged Oscar and for the first time in her life was incredibly happy when he came to her room. The two men stood aside and watched as Oscar won the contest. An ambassador of the Holy Empire named Muntengo was accused of kidnapping a member of the royal family and sent back on the condition that he never cross the border of the Hermano Empire. The confused priest did not even know how to appear before his holy king. The only thing he was happy about was that he was spared life, although it was quite difficult because of the emperor's fury. The Saint King told Muntengo to come closer and ask him how he was doing with the sacred seed that he had been sent to the Hermano Empire to retrieve. Muntengo knew that the sacred king would never forgive him for failing their sacred mission, and he had no other way than to confess. Therefore, he regretfully reported that they failed to kidnap Mabel. But the king just waved his hand and said that he did not expect any other answer from Muntengo. The king did not expect that he would be able to bring the girl because he knew in advance that the ambassador was incompetent in this matter. The ambassador bowed his head and thought that he did not expect such an insult from the holy king, and could not understand the meaning of the words that the king knew in advance that the mission would fail. The Saint King said that he had sent the priests to the Hermano Empire to check whether they were carefully protecting the god's seed, so he did not even expect that they would succeed in stealing Mabel. Saint King Michael Abelardo told Muntengo that this was a kind of rehearsal before the actual return of the sacred seed to the sacred land. Muntengo understood that he was only a decoy, and knowing the grave character of his king, he was not even surprised by this development of events. And then he asked his lord if he had a plan to get the sacred child back. Michael Abelardo smiled a kind of predatory smile and said that, of course, he had something in mind, and Muntengo would find out about it in due time. The ambassador only replied that such an answer would be enough. The Holy King never appeared in public and conducted all his affairs through representatives, holy priests. Therefore, neither the age of the Holy King nor his appearance was unknown to the outside world. At the mention of the Holy King, everyone imagined a gray-haired old man, but in fact he was a man with the appearance of an angel. Even Muntengo himself was afraid to find out what kind of king was inside. From the very morning, the princess was quite capricious and constantly cried. The worried nanny asked the girl if she had any pain, because she could not understand what it was related to. Mabel felt some unbearable pain and did not understand what was causing it. The nanny asked the girl to open her mouth to see what was inside her and carefully examine the oral cavity. After examining her mouth, the nanny smiled, and Mabel was just shocked that her nanny, whom she trusted so much, was laughing when she was in so much pain. The servants also asked Ruth why she was smiling. Then the nanny said that her highness was teething, and that is why she had been so restless since the morning. Mabel's eyes blinked in surprise and tried to repeat the words that her teeth were cutting. The girl was only good at making loud sounds, and the nanny praised Mabel for her efforts and said that as soon as all her teeth came through, she would be able to pronounce words well, and they would understand what she was saying. It was clear from the girl's reaction that she was happy, and the servants admired how their princess, not fully understanding what teething means, was still happy that she would have them. The nanny cheerfully suggested that everyone prepare for the arrival of the emperor, because she was 100% sure that if he learns this news, he will definitely visit them today. But the toothache was so unbearable that Mabel could not stand it and started crying again. The nanny tried to calm the girl and said that these were normal physiological changes in her body. The servants began to cheer up the little princess, saying that even crying is quite cute. This pissed off Mabel even more, because she really was in so much pain that she could barely hold on. They did not have time to prepare for the arrival of the emperor when the door to Her Highness's room opened and the happy emperor appeared on the threshold, who had already learned the news about his daughter's first teeth. Lysandro was also peering into Mabel's room through the crack in the door and was glad to hear such news. Mabel immediately guessed where her father had learned everything. The emperor announced that a national holiday should be organized for such an occasion. The emperor invited everyone to think about what to present to the little princess on the occasion of such an event, and Mabel was anxiously waiting to see what her mad daddy would do this time. The girl barely remembered these remarkable gifts of forests and principalities, and did not even know what to do with them when she grew up. Meanwhile, the emperor was thinking hard about the gift. Mabel decided to intervene in the situation until the emperor came up with some crazy idea. Therefore, she began to say the word sweets, but she only came out with lashi. Everyone, led by the emperor, began to think about what exactly the little princess was saying, and then it came to them that she was talking about sweets. The emperor happily said that he would present her with a chef on such an occasion. The shocked girl looked at her father and mentally said that she only wanted sweets and not a person as a gift, but arguing with the emperor was a bad idea. Already in the office, the assistant informed the emperor that a letter had arrived from the sacred empire of Abelardo, and that the king himself wanted to attend a solemn event on the occasion of Mabel's first anniversary. The emperor angrily tore the letter into hundreds of pieces, which scattered all over the cabinet. It was obvious that His Highness's mood had completely deteriorated after such a message. Gustav knew that His Highness did not want to even talk about it, and noted that according to royal etiquette, they should send a reply to the sacred empire. After Montengo tried to kidnap Mabel, Abelardo's sacred empire behaved quietly, and the emperor already thought that the story would end. But he had to perceive this message as a declaration of war. But after thinking a little, the emperor decided that it might be for the best, because now he had a good reason to protect his own daughter from their encroachments. So Evan quickly wrote an answer on a piece of paper and handed it to Gustavus, so that he could immediately send a letter to the sacred empire of Abelardo. The aide looked at its contents and asked if the emperor really wanted to send it. The emperor said that the banquet was 2 months away, and they should prepare well for the arrival of the holy king whose face no one had ever seen. Therefore, it was written in the letter that they would look forward to the personal visit of the holy king, Michael Abelardo. The emperor said aloud that he would especially look forward to this meeting. There was a continuous rustle of footsteps outside the door, and the atmosphere in the room was tense but festive. All this said that today was the first year of the birth of the little princess. The nanny took the girl in her arms and brought her to the mirror to prepare for her first appearance in the world. Mabel realized that for the first time in her new life, she saw her reflection in the mirror. The girl was always interested in what she really looked like, and what she saw excited her. After all the words about her beauty turned out to be the truth. Mabel looked at herself with interest and noticed that the emperor and Oscar had light hair, and she had light pink hair. And her first 4 teeth were so sweetly white in her mouth as soon as she smiled. Larimar noticed how intently the little princess looked at her reflection and asked her if she would now understand why everyone around her was constantly admiring her beauty. Xavier said that he had a hard time with this mirror when he brought it back, because when the girl was born, it was removed so that, God forbid, it would not break, because it was an evil sign. Larimar was collecting papers, where the little girl was limping, because the emperor ordered to collect everything in a pile. Nanny, meanwhile, asked the maid to help her dress Her Highness. The nanny said that for such an occasion, a special outfit had been prepared for the princess today, and she got an incredibly beautiful dress of golden color, which was all embroidered with gold threads. Mabel could not believe that she had the opportunity to wear such a luxurious dress today. because in the past life they were so poor that such a thing could not even be dreamed of. When the nanny was doing the little princess's hair, she said that Mabel had an incredible hair color, the same as her late mother's, and she looks exactly like Sienna. Now Mabel realized that she was outwardly similar to her mother, but she did not know how to react to this, because she was already confused about where her real mother was, because she considered a woman from her past life to be her family. While Mabel was lost in thought, the nurse and maid finished dressing Her Highness and invited the princess to assess her appearance today. When Mabel looked up at her reflection, she was simply delighted with what she saw. The same was said to her by all the servants, who could not help but admire the beauty and today's appearance of Her Highness. Larimar couldn't resist and wanted to hug the little princess, so Xavier stopped her, saying that she would change this beautiful outfit. While they were arguing, the door to the room opened and the emperor entered. When the emperor's gaze rested on Her Highness, some strange lights shone in his eyes and he could not speak for a few minutes, and then he said that Mabel was simply incredible today. Mabel also examined the emperor and noted that when he is wearing such solemn clothes, he looks completely different, and despite what he had to go through, he still looks very much nothing. The emperor took his daughter in his arms and lifted her up. Then he looked into her blue eyes and wished her a happy birthday. Mabel smiled back because she was greeted with this holiday for the first time in her life. In her past life, the girl was never congratulated on her birthday, and when she grew up, she realized that if you receive gifts, you need to do it for each other, so she preferred to celebrate alone. The emperor kissed his daughter on the forehead, and she thought that it was still very nice to be congratulated on her birthday. Meanwhile, the emperor's assistant came in and announced that it was time to go to the hall. The emperor asked where Oscar was. Gustav said that the boy had already gone to the banquet hall with his mother, Duchess Donovan, so everyone was waiting only for the emperor with Mabel. Walking down the hall, Mabel could hear the echoes of music coming from the banquet hall. Her heart was beating faster and faster, and when they stopped at the door, the emperor announced that it was time to enter. Until this time, Mabel had met no more than 10 people who constantly surrounded the little princess. But today she will have to meet 100 new faces from whom she did not know what to expect. The little girl wanted to hide behind her father, so she tightly grabbed his clothes. The emperor smiled and said that he understood her anxiety, but she still had to take this step. The emperor said in a calm tone that she had nothing to fear, because he would always be by her side. It's just that these people want to look at her, but the princess doesn't have to look at them at all. Mabel, after listening to the emperor's words, actually somehow calmed down and stopped worrying so much. The valet announced loudly that his high son of this empire and his daughter had arrived. Mabel mentally noted that all her names were listed without the word winter, which she was very happy about, and those present at the banquet bowed before His Highness. Mabel noticed that the crowded hall had become deathly quiet, and out of the corner of her eye, she noticed that there were 2 more chairs next to the throne. The girl decided that it was definitely for her and for Oscar. The emperor put his daughter on the throne, and because of that, she had some kind of awkward feeling. Mabel's only wish at that time was for it to end as soon as possible and for her to go back to her room. The emperor loudly told the audience to raise their heads and congratulated everyone on the first birthday of his daughter and princess of the Empire Hermano. People, raising their heads, all directed their gazes at the little princess. Her Highness couldn't get out of her head the question why her father put her on the throne, because it was not her place, and because of this, she felt quite uncomfortable and started to worry again. The guests present also looked at the girl with surprised eyes, but they did not dare to remark something to their emperor. Among those present, the girl noticed people in white robes. The emperor decided to brag about his daughter's achievements and announced that at 3 months his daughter started talking, and at 8 months she started walking. Mabel at that time covered herself with red color from shame. The emperor noted that Mabel's closest assistants could confirm his words. The servants nodded their heads in agreement. Mabel wanted to fall through the ground in shame. The emperor also noticed the representatives of Abelardo's sacred empire out of the corner of his eye and greeted the ambassadors present, saying that he hoped they would enjoy the banquet. Mabel began to frantically look for the man who was coming to her room to steal her. because he was also wearing that white robe. The realization that he was also here scared her. The emperor noticed how his daughter began to worry again, and, leaning over her, whispered that the man who wanted to kidnap her was not allowed to enter here, so she could not worry. Mabel breathed a sigh of relief and thought that they wouldn't try to kidnap her with so many witnesses, and decided to relax and enjoy her holiday. Later, Her Highness was approached by her older brother Oscar, who smiled and greeted Mabel. He was also dressed for the occasion today, and these clothes suited the young man very well. Mabel immediately reached out to her older brother and smiled at Oscar. He gave her a couple of compliments, noting how incredibly beautiful she is today, and also wished her a happy first birthday. Oscar said that of course he wanted to congratulate her even before the banquet, but he did not allow the emperor to enter her room because he wanted to greet his daughter first. Mabel noted in her mind that her dad must be wrong. Then the boy reached into his pocket and said that he would be the first to give her a present, however, and took out a very beautiful pendant with an emerald that accentuated the color of her eyes. Mabel kept her eyes on such an expensive gift and realized that this was the first time in her life that she received something for her birthday, and the boy happily fastened the gift around his neck and asked if he liked it. Oscar then pointed to a pile of presents lying at the edge of the banquet hall and said that it all belonged to Mabel as well. When she entered the hall, the girl thought that it was just part of the interior for her birthday. The little princess understood that the gifts were sent by everyone present at the banquet, and most likely, not out of goodwill. Meanwhile, the emperor noticed that his daughter was upset and said that it was probably because of the small number of gifts. Then Mabel felt a piercing gaze on her. She was looking for someone in the crowd whose gaze made her feel so uncomfortable, and she couldn't figure out who exactly was looking at her like that. In the meantime, the emperor told her not to be upset because he had prepared a gorgeous gift for her and announced to the whole hall that it was time to give her gift to her father as well. When silence reigned in the hall again, the emperor said loudly that he was giving Her Highness the country. Mabel's eyes widened in surprise, and at first she thought she had just heard all this. Mabel tried to convince herself that it was only a dream because she couldn't believe it and didn't want it to be real. This senseless act of the emperor caused her fear. Meanwhile, the emperor said even more loudly that he was abdicating at the expense of Mabel Gardenia Hermano. The princess cursed in her mind, realizing that this was not a dream,